Chapter 608. Although the dragon ancestor did not know what Luo Fan was planning, he knew that at this point, Luo Fan could no longer give him any more answers. He did not say anything else and entered the Dong Mansion with Luo Fan. Discussion of the Tao was not unfamiliar to Luo Fan and the dragon ancestor. Therefore, there was no need to say anything more. The dragon ancestor directly shook his bloodline true body and turned it into a blood-red cloud that floated above his head. It was an acre in size and surged with waves. It gave off an extremely powerful dragon might. Light and shadows flowed on it, as if there were countless figures of people and dragons living within it. Luo Fan faintly smiled. With a slight thought, the auspicious cloud he had cultivated rushed out from the top of his head, forming another auspicious cloud 3 feet above his head. This auspicious cloud was as clear as water, incomparably translucent, and above it were 3 green lotuses with a chaotic luster. Luo Fan's original cloud was not this size, nor was the original green lotus. However, although the mountain that the dragon ancestor Jiao Yuan lived in was called a Dong Mansion, it was not as big as the Dong Mansion that Luo Fan had set up in the Great Wasteland. It did not have the special ability to contain objects that exceeded the size of the Dong Mansion itself. Moreover, it was to give the dragon ancestor some face, so that the dragon ancestor would not be embarrassed if the difference was too great. Because of this, he was able to compress his auspicious cloud to its current size. Even though he had compressed the cloud to such a size, the dragon ancestor Jiao Yuan still felt an indescribable shock when the cloud appeared above Luo Fan's head. The cloud formed by his bloodline true body was naturally different from the cloud formed by Luo Fan. The cloud formed by the bloodline true body could be said to be another body of his. The mysteries contained within it were the mysteries of the bloodline true body. Even if Jiao Yuan was unwilling, he could only hide some of the more important mysteries. He could not fake anything, nor could he let others know that he was hiding something. As a result, the quality of power on this cloud was exactly the same as the Jiao Hun's main body. It was the manifestation of its most fundamental Tao. As soon as Luo Fan's auspicious cloud appeared, Jiao Yuan sensed an aura that was completely different from Luo Fan's body coming from the auspicious cloud. That auspicious cloud was like an aggregation of information, like a condensed body of an aura. Although it contained endless mysteries and principles, those mysteries and principles were like a book that was controlled by the other party and could be controlled at will. Concealment and fabrication were only the simplest of characteristics. This already revealed the huge difference between this person's cultivation method and this world. How could Jiao Huan, who had already guessed it, not be shocked? It seems like this Tao discussion might not only be good for this person, but it might also be good for me. Maybe I can break through to the end realm that no cultivator has broken through to in billions of years. Jiao Yuan couldn't help but feel pumped up. Originally, he had only discussed the Tao with Luo Fan because Luo Fan's strength was so powerful that he couldn't resist and had no choice but to do so. However, at this moment, he discovered the hidden benefits. So his attitude naturally became more proactive. The blood cloud above his head surged and moved toward the cloud above Luo Fan's head. Luo Fan faintly smiled and closed his eyes. His mind condensed on the cloud above his head. After slightly processing the mysteries contained within the cloud, he urged the cloud to meet the blood cloud above Jiao Huan's head. The mysteries he added to the cloud weren't fake at all, but he hid a lot of them. At most, it contained some golden core cultivation methods that he had comprehended on Earth. It included connate and acquire golden core, but the highest realm was only the leakless golden core. He had hidden the mystery of 3 flowers gathering at one's acupoint. It did not contain any information about cultivation in the primordial world. This wasn't because Luo Fan wanted to take advantage of him, but because the gap between Luo Fan and Jiao Yuan was just too huge. Based on what Luo Fan deduced, with the mysteries that Jiao Yuan comprehended, the Hodian golden core cultivation technique that he casually created was enough. Moreover, there was also the Xiantian golden core cultivation technique. How could that be considered taking advantage of him? Luo Fan's cloud and the blood cloud above the dragon ancestor's head slowly touched one another. In an instant, the void trembled slightly. There seemed to be countless roars of dragons and tigers, and countless celestial sounds echoed in the mountain. Between the blood cloud and the auspicious cloud, there was a strange fragrance. The fragrance was like the fragrance of orchids. It was not strong, but it made one feel relaxed and happy. After smelling it, one's soul would become clear and bright. In an instant, countless shadows, countless words, countless patterns, countless spells, and countless spells flowed between the minds of Luo Fan and Jiao Yuan. The moment the auspicious cloud and the blood cloud intertwined, the information and profundities contained within the auspicious cloud and the blood cloud began to be revealed to the other party. It flowed through the other party's mind in an incomparably profound way, without any obstruction or reservation. So that's how it is. At this moment, Luo Fan's mind was filled with enlightenment. The dragon ancestor had been revered as one of the 8 ancestors of men for tens of millions of years, and he had cultivated for a long time before this. Although his cultivation was nothing in Luo Fan's eyes, his understanding of this planet was the deepest among all the cultivators on this planet. At this moment, he had opened up the mysteries of his cultivation, allowing Luo Fan to sense his understanding of this world, this planet, and this galaxy. Due to Jiao Yuan's limited vision, this knowledge might be very hazy and vague. He only knew how it was, but not why it was. However, to Luo Fan, everything was so clear. He even saw the essence of this planet's cultivation in an instant. He saw how this planet had developed from nothing to this prosperous and perfect cultivation system. Before the dragon ancestor, this planet naturally had its own cultivation world. In fact, the cultivation method he had cultivated in the previous cultivation world was still the cultivation method of this bloodline true body. Although he was revered as one of the 8 ancestors of men, it was only because he had organized, innovated, and perfected the various cultivation methods related to the dragon bloodline. However, he had not truly created this cultivation method. Like him, the other 7 patriarchs of the 8 patriarchs, such as the bear patriarch, the water patriarch, and the bird patriarch, were similar to him. They had only perfected the cultivation methods of certain attribute. At most, they had created specific cultivation methods that had never existed before, which could directly lead to the so-called realm of undying and indestructible. That was all. Although this was extremely rare and could be called a genius that was hard to find throughout the ages, it was not enough to enter Luo Fan's eyes. In Luo Fan's mind, the boundless information that dragon ancestor Jiao Yuan had instilled started to reorganize and reconstruct in an extremely mysterious way. Gradually, it formed a more and more complete world. This world had a round sky and flat earth. There was sky, earth, mountains, and water. There were countless strange creatures living in it. These creatures all contained all types of indescribable bloodline powers. They continuously cultivated and grew, continuously refining and purifying their bloodlines. In the end, their incarnations possessed inconceivable power, transcending death and merging with heaven and earth. Among these countless creatures, there was a bloodline power that rose to a certain realm during this process. It broke through the boundary between life and death and truly became one with the world. From then on, it was undying and indestructible. It possessed power that surpassed most other bloodline powers. This was the dragon ancestor's Jiao dragon bloodline. It was also the source of his creation. After the dragon bloodline broke through the boundary between life and death, it continuously absorbed the mysteries contained in other bloodlines. It purified them and gradually refined the essence of the bloodline power. It created various methods that could be extended to turn the other bloodline powers into the dragon bloodline power. From then on, it formed its own system, becoming an earth-shaking cultivation system. This entire process lasted for an unknown number of years. Every single change in the bloodline was a rare experience for Luo Fan. Although it might not be able to surpass his previous knowledge, It continuously expanded some of his thoughts that he had never thought deeply about in the past. It allowed his understanding of the bloodline to deepen. Gradually, he felt enlightened. Although it was only a feeling and could not allow him to truly break through in his knowledge, Luo Fan was already quite satisfied. He felt that this trip had not been in vain. After all, this sudden realization had already opened up a little of his train of thought, allowing him to think of some kind of method that could continue to extend and possibly break through his own knowledge. As long as he had this kind of understanding, Luo Fan had already achieved his goal, and the breakthrough of his knowledge in the future could almost be predicted. Luo Fan was already slightly satisfied on this side, but Jiao Huan had sunk into an indescribable shock. Although Luo Fan had only revealed the cultivation methods of the acquired and innate golden cores and did not include too many other mysteries, he had revealed the origins of the two golden cores with indescribable clarity. In fact, if he were to slowly explain it, any stupid person who had never cultivated before could easily cultivate the two golden cores from the information he had revealed. Under these circumstances, the dragon ancestor, who could create countless cultivation methods and summarize the origins of the dragon bloodline, only needed to pay a little attention to understand the cultivation essence of the two golden cores. And it was precisely this kind of understanding that gave him such an unprecedented shock. In that instant, all the dissatisfaction and grievances he had felt before the discussion completely disappeared. It even turned into an indescribable joy and joy. There's actually such a cultivation method that points directly to the great Tao in this world. The acquired golden core is still fine. Although it's not complete, the final result might not be much different from the cultivation method of the bloodline true body. However, the innate golden core is earth-shattering. From the looks of it, just forming a golden core is already much stronger than me. If it's a so-called leakless, innate golden core, then I can even destroy the entire world with a finger. Unbelievable, unbelievable. Jiao Huan screamed in his heart. Fortunately, this person found me. If he found someone else, wouldn't I never be able to see such a mysterious cultivation method in my life? Jiao Huan was overjoyed. An indescribable smile naturally appeared on his face. The blood clouds above his head churned even more violently. The various mysteries of cultivation he had originally planned on hiding were all revealed to Luo Fan at the same time. He no longer hid anything and allowed Luo Fan to take whatever he wanted. Jiao Huan was known as the 8 ancestors of cultivation. His cultivation was profound, and being able to create countless cultivation methods was only a prerequisite. If he didn't have enough bearing, he wouldn't have been listed as one of the 8 ancestors of cultivation. It wasn't like this hadn't happened before. Jiao Huan knew of around 10 existences that could be compared to Jiao Huan. Aside from them, there were definitely some hidden experts that he didn't know about. However, only the 8 of them were known as the 8 ancestors of cultivation. From this, it could be seen that Jiao Huan's bearing wasn't simple. Because of his extraordinary bearing, after thinking that he had obtained unimaginable benefits, Jiao Yuan was not willing to just take advantage of him without paying anything. He directly revealed his most precious cultivation secrets to Luo Fan. When Jiao Huan changed his mind and revealed all of his cultivation secrets, Luo Fan had already sensed it. However, these cultivation secrets were the most precious to Jiao Huan. In the past, he would never mention them to a second person, but to Luo Fan, they were the most worthless. This was because these mysteries were related to the mysteries of the Great Tao. They were what Jiao Huan had comprehended over the past tens of millions of years. They were related to the origin laws of the earth and the Great Tao. These things were incomparably important to Jiao Huan, but to Luo Fan, who had an indestructible imprint in the depths of his soul and had comprehended the mysteries of the Great Tao for tens of millions of years, they were all things that he had comprehended before. In fact, they were far less profound than what he had comprehended. So what was the point of them to him? However, when Luo Fan sensed this change, a faint smile appeared on his face. Even if these things were meaningless to him, it meant that Jiao Huan didn't hold anything back. From this, it could be seen what kind of person Jiao Huan was. Although Luo Fan didn't care about the other person's character, as long as the other person could expand his thinking and increase his knowledge, it would be enough. But if the person he was going to have sex with was someone he admired, someone who could make him feel that he wouldn't be unwilling to give them benefits, then it would naturally be better. Jiao Huan was willing to take out his most precious things after obtaining benefits. This naturally made him admire him. This discussion of the Tao continued for 3 days and 3 nights before it stopped. The auspicious cloud and blood cloud above their heads separated once again and floated 3 feet above Jiao Huan and Luo Fan's heads. Luo Fan's expression was one of enlightenment, but Jiao Huan's expression was one of enlightenment. It was as if he had finally seen the truth of the world after being confused for tens of millions of years. After a long time, the blood cloud above Jiao Huan's head suddenly turned back into a dragon. With a slight tremble, it fused into the space behind him and once again became illusory and illusory. As for Luo Fan, he had already recalled the cloud back into his sea of consciousness when the cloud and blood cloud separated. At this moment, his expression was indifferent as he waited for Jiao Huan. After Jiao Huan withdrew his bloodline true body, he stood up and bowed to Luo Fan. Although I am one of the 8 ancestors of cultivation, I have only seen the great Tao today. Fellow Taoist, please accept my bow. With that, he knelt down. Luo Fan faintly smiled and shook his head. He knew that the person before him was determined. Since he had said it, he would definitely bow. If he stopped him, it would be disrespectful. However, he didn't want to disrespect someone he admired, so he didn't stop him. After Jiao Huan bowed, Luo Fan raised his hand and said, "Fellow Taoist, there is no need to be so polite. You and I have discussed the Tao, and we have both gained something. No. With fellow Taoist ability, as long as you stay in this world for a period of time, everything I know will no longer be a secret to you. However, even if I spend billions of years, I'm afraid I won't be able to comprehend the grand Tao that you know. How can it be equal? Unfortunately, my knowledge is limited and I can't repay fellow Taoist at all. I feel guilty." Dragon Ancestor Jiao Huan sighed. Luo Fan faintly smiled. Just as he was about to speak, he felt an aura coming from the distance. He instantly knew that 3 days had passed. The Bear Ancestor was coming again to invite the Dragon Ancestor to participate in the so-called great event. He didn't want to be entangled with the matter of stopping the flow of the times. Therefore, he said to Dragon Ancestor Jiao Huan, "Everyone knows what they have gained. How does fellow Taoist know that what I have gained is not as good as yours? There is no need to mention this matter again. Fellow Taoist has a guest, and our Tao discussion has just ended, so I will take my leave." With that, he nodded and took a step forward. With a single step, he disappeared from the Dong Mansion. The countless restrictions hidden in the Dong Mansion acted as if they didn't exist. They weren't touched at all, nor could they affect him in the slightest, allowing him to enter and leave as he pleased. Although he had already expected this, Jiao Huan still revealed an indescribable expression when Luo Fan left so easily. He felt that he had been a frog at the bottom of a well in the past. It was laughable for him to think that he was extraordinary just by looking at the mouth of a small well. After a long while, Jiao Huan sensed an aura break through space and appear outside the Dong Mansion. He had only sensed this aura 3 days ago. It was the aura of the Bear Ancestor. With a thought, he was even more shocked by how strong Luo Fan's senses were. Traveling by breaking through the void was an untraceable method. Since ancient times, no one had been able to sense a cultivator's destination at any moment before the cultivator finished breaking through the void. Chapter 609. After recovering from his shock, Jiao Huan took a step forward and directly crossed tens of thousands of feet. He appeared outside the Dong Mansion and was several feet away from where Xiong Zhu had come from. Jiao Huan's reaction speed had reached an unimaginable level. Although Ancestor Xiong had crossed through space first, he had appeared at practically the same time as Jiao Huan. When Xiong Zhu tore open space and reappeared, he suddenly saw a figure appear before him. He couldn't help but be shocked. However, Xiongzu was Xiongzu after all. His expression didn't change at all. He only smiled and said, "I was wondering if I would be left in the cold today, but I didn't expect Dragon Ancestor to personally come out to welcome me. I'm truly flattered. There's no need to say anything else. I already know why Xiongzu has come today. It's just that I've gained a lot from discussing Tao with a fellow cultivator from the outer realm for the past 3 days. Now that I'm focused on cultivation, I don't have the heart to care about anything else. Xiongzu, please return." Jiahuan didn't have the heart to exchange pleasantries with Xiongzu. What he said was his true thoughts. There wasn't a single lie. Over the past 3 days, he had seen a whole new world while discussing Tao with Luo Fan. He had seen a brand new cultivation method that was more direct than the bloodline true body cultivation method. At this moment, there were countless thoughts and countless inspirations in his mind. He couldn't wait to go into closed-door cultivation to create a cultivation method for the bloodline true body from his Hotian and Xiantian golden cores. He didn't have the heart to care about anything else. Even if what Xiongzu wanted to do was related to the fate of the entire planet, it was the same. Xiongzu couldn't help but be startled. He and the Dragon Ancestor were both the 8 ancestors of the cultivation world. Although they did not have much of a relationship, they had been mentioned in the same breath for tens of millions of years after all. They had long known each other's character and style. In his opinion, the Dragon Ancestor was a gentle and righteous person. If something related to the fate of this planet really came to him, no matter how important it was, he would definitely not decline. He would definitely put down everything on hand and participate in it. However, he didn't expect the Dragon Ancestor to directly refuse without listening to him. Looking at the Dragon Ancestor's determined expression, he wouldn't agree no matter what he said. This was completely inconsistent with his character in the past, and it was truly puzzling. Ancestor Bear frowned after a moment of shock. After being surprised by the Dragon Ancestor's performance, the Bear Ancestor began to think of a countermeasure. What he was planning right now was truly of great importance. It was indeed related to the fate of the entire planet and the fate of all the cultivators on this planet. It was also because of this that he had the confidence to move the Dragon Ancestor and get him to participate. This was also the reason why he was still unwilling to give up after suffering a setback 3 days ago. But at this moment, he knew that no matter how important that matter was, it was meaningless. As one of the 8 patriarchs, the Bear Patriarch understood the Dragon Patriarch's mentality very well. Since the Dragon Patriarch had already refused before the matter was made clear, it showed that the determination in his heart was already firm to the point of being unshakable. No words or force would be able to sway his decision. Ancestor Xiong was extraordinarily intelligent after all, and he'd already thought of a countermeasure in just a few breaths of time. He said, "Since Dragon Ancestor is focused on cultivation and doesn't want to be distracted, forget it. However, this matter requires the help of a bit of the Dragon Ancestor's bloodline. I wonder if the Dragon Ancestor is willing to cut off a bit of his bloodline to complete this matter of boundless merit." Bloodline was the core of all the cultivators on this planet. Cutting off the bloodline was cutting off the core of cultivation. Asking a cultivator to cut off their bloodline was extremely rude, even to the weakest cultivator on this planet. Moreover, at this moment, the Bear Patriarch was facing one of the 8 patriarchs that had been respected by all the cultivators on this planet for tens of millions of years, the Dragon Ancestor. At this moment, an indescribable anger surged in the Dragon Ancestor's heart. However, this anger only surged for a moment. After a moment, he understood. The Bear Patriarch was definitely not a mediocre person. He naturally knew what this request meant to him. Even so, he still dared to make such a request. Either the Bear Patriarch looked down on him, or his bloodline was extremely important to the matter that was about to be carried out. It might even be related to the success or failure of this matter. Thinking back to the Bear Patriarch's personality that he had heard for tens of millions of years, the Dragon Ancestor's mind gradually calmed down. After a long time, the Dragon Ancestor nodded and said, "I won't ask why the Bear Patriarch wants my bloodline. Since the Bear Patriarch thinks that my bloodline is useful, then take it." As he spoke, he casually pointed with a finger. The faintly discernible dragon behind him shook slightly and spat out a strange, blood-red existence. This blood-red existence was mysterious and indescribable. Although it was a ball, it seemed like a small ball of roots that had been cut off from a huge, towering tree. There were countless veins within it, as if it had been divided into extremely tiny roots. When these roots first appeared, they seemed to have casually shaved off a bit of the tree's edge. They seemed messy and disorderly. However, after a while, these roots underwent a strange and inexplicable change. They began to gradually transform and recombine. Not long after, they tangled together into a ball that emitted a certain kind of complete aura. After these strange roots left the main body, they adjusted themselves and formed a complete whole on their own. After this change, the roots had already become like detailed dragons. Their tails tangled together, forming a strange, tiny ball. There seemed to be light flickering within the ball, as if it was a world of its own. Their bodies and heads stretched out in all directions, as if they had burrowed into space. They extracted all sorts of mysterious and indescribable power from the space and fused it with the countless roots, filling up the world-like ball at the center. This was the original appearance of the bloodline that had formed the bloodline true body. It was also the core of the dragon ancestor's cultivation. When the bear ancestor saw the ball of bloodline in the dragon ancestor's hand, shock appeared on his face. He was naturally not shocked by the profundities of this bloodline. In fact, even though this bloodline was profound and unfathomable, the bloodline he possessed was absolutely not inferior to the bloodline before him, so it naturally wouldn't cause him to be shocked. What he was shocked about was that the dragon ancestor had so straightforwardly taken out a part of his cultivation, the essence of his cultivation, and sent it to him. One must know that the bloodline was the core of a cultivator's cultivation. Although the power and cultivation contained within the bloodline occupied a part of a cultivator's power and cultivation, it was only a part after all. As long as a certain amount of effort and a certain amount of heavenly resources were used, the cultivator could recover it after a certain amount of time. The reason why the bloodline was so important was because it contained all the secrets of a cultivator's cultivation. If a cultivator obtained the bloodline of a cultivator with a higher cultivation than him, it was equivalent to obtaining that cultivator's inheritance. If a cultivator obtained the bloodline of a cultivator with the same cultivation as him, it was equivalent to grasping all of that cultivator's weaknesses and grasping all of that cultivator's weaknesses. The difficulty of dealing with that cultivator would instantly decrease by 1,000 times or even 10,000 times. The dragon ancestor actually sent such an important bloodline over just because he said so. This caused the bear ancestor to feel an indescribable sense of heroism in his heart. The dragon ancestor really deserves his reputation. I'm filled with admiration. The bear ancestor bowed and carefully received the ball of bloodline. The dragon ancestor's face was slightly pale after losing the ball of bloodline, and his aura seemed slightly weak. The energy within his body was slightly dispersed, and he revealed a strand of formidable dragon might that he didn't possess in the past. It was the embodiment of not being able to perfectly control his own strength. When he saw the bear ancestor bow, he moved aside slightly and said, "This is something that I should do. After all, I'm one of the living beings born in the world, and the fate of the world is related to me." The bear ancestor smiled lightly and said, "We'll definitely remember fellow Taoist benevolence, and we'll definitely repay you in the future. Since I've already accomplished something today, it's not good for me to waste any more time, so I have no choice but to leave." The dragon ancestor smiled lightly and said, "As you wish, fellow Taoist." The bear ancestor bowed once more, and then he turned around and took a stride forward before tearing space apart and entering it. In an instant, he'd vanished without a trace, and he'd left directly. After the bear ancestor left, the dragon ancestor smiled lightly, and then he turned around and entered the estate before sitting down cross-legged. The bear ancestor only knew the importance of the bloodline, Yet he didn't know that after discussing the Tao with Luo Fan for 3 days, he'd already obtained countless new ideas, and he felt that he could create some techniques that could make up for the weakness of the bloodline true body. At this moment, even though the bloodline was important to him, it was far less important than the bear ancestor thought, and he could afford to lose it. It was precisely because of this that he gave away the bloodline so readily. If it wasn't for this reason, the dragon ancestor might have given away the bloodline in the end, but he would absolutely not have given it away so readily. At the very least, he would have thought about it carefully for a few days before he was willing to give it away. With a slight thought in his mind, he opened his mouth and let out a shapeless sound wave. The sound wave traveled far into the distance, and it wasn't long before numerous streaks flew out from the nearby mountains towards the estate. Those were the disciples who were listening to the dragon ancestor's lecture. Clearly, it was the dragon ancestor who summoned the disciples. After the disciples arrived and sat down, the dragon ancestor said, "In the past few days, I've learned a lot from the Outer Realm fellow Taoists, and I've decided to go into seclusion to cultivate. There are a few techniques here. Study them properly while I'm in seclusion, and don't slack off." As he spoke, he casually waved his hand, and a few pieces of blood jade flew out from his sleeve and landed in the hands of the eldest disciple. When the disciples heard the dragon ancestor's words, they all bowed and kowtowed, wishing the dragon ancestor success in his seclusion. After that, the dragon ancestor waved everyone away and activated the restrictive technique within the estate. The entire mountain that the estate was located on trembled slightly, and as if it had instantly come to life, the entire mountain began to slowly move. Subsequently, the entire mountain flickered with light, and it directly tore through space and disappeared without a trace, leaving behind only a flat ground that was as smooth as a mirror. Clearly, the dragon ancestor had gone to a secret place with the entire mountain to cultivate in seclusion. Luo Fan did not pay attention to what the dragon ancestor had done after he left. In reality, at this moment, he had already completed his basic goal of coming to the mother and child galaxy. Although the dragon ancestor was someone he admired, he could not attract too much of his attention. After he left the dragon ancestor's estate, he tore through space and directly flew towards the depths of the planet. Although he had basically satisfied his goal of coming to the mother and child galaxy, Luo Fan's curiosity was not satisfied. Just what was inside the planet that caused it to show such strange characteristics? It had mysteries that he had never seen even after crossing 2 universes. He still did not know. This planet was millions of times larger than Earth, and the ground was naturally extremely deep. As Luo Fan flew down, he saw many strange terrains that did not appear on Earth, but could be found in the great wasteland world. Although this made Luo Fan feel that it was novel, it was clearly not the reason why this planet was so strange. He naturally would not stop. After flying like this for a few moments, when he passed through the layer of magma that contained endless earth fire, which was enough to turn even the cultivators on this planet that were thousands of times stronger than the dragon ancestor into nothingness, the world in front of Luo Fan suddenly became clear. A bright space that occupied more than half of the planet, which was also millions of times the size of Earth, appeared in front of Luo Fan. This planet was actually hollow. So that's how it is. When he discovered the hollow of the planet, Luo Fan could not help but have a sudden realization in his mind. Previously, he could sense that there was something strange inside the planet, but this kind of abnormality was very strange. It seemed to have some kind of ability to distort space and time, causing his senses to become vague. It was difficult for him to determine what was going on inside the planet. This made him personally come to the inside of the planet to check, want to find the hidden secrets of the planet. At this moment, as soon as he saw the situation inside the planet, he instantly understood. He knew that this planet had already cultivated spiritual consciousness hundreds of millions of years ago. Even before the planet's cultivation world had appeared, or even before the planet's living beings had appeared, it had already cultivated spiritual consciousness and possessed incredible magical powers. In the end, it condensed a part of its own star body turned it into a strange form of existence and transformed its body. When he understood this, the strangeness of the mother and child galaxy, which was different from the other parts of the universe on Earth, was instantly explained. The yang qi that this galaxy possessed was several times denser than in other parts of the universe. It was not naturally formed at all, but naturally condensed during the cultivation of this planet. It was precisely because of this that the yang qi on the surface of the planet was condensed to such a degree, creating such a glorious cultivation civilization. The reason why the countless cultivators on the surface of the planet were able to condense the formation patterns and fuse their bloodline true bodies with the planet, becoming immortal from then on, was because the planet itself was a cultivator, possessing spiritual consciousness and magical powers. Regardless of the bloodline of these cultivators, they were born from the planet and had an extremely close connection with the planet itself. They could almost be called the descendants of the planet itself, which was why they were able to fuse with it. In an instant, many thoughts had already emerged in Luo Fan's mind, and he understood the biggest secret of this galaxy. Luo Fan stopped at the edge of this huge space, looked up, and found out why this bright space was so bright. It turned out that in the center of this huge space, there was a sphere that was tens of thousands of feet in diameter, emitting endless light. The sphere looked extremely sturdy, as if it was made of the toughest throw on the planet, but Luo Fan could tell at a glance that the sphere was basically condensed from yang qi. The endless light emitted from the sphere was produced by burning and transforming yang qi in an extremely special way, and it had the power to remove all impurities. If the cultivators on the surface of the planet obtained any of these endless lights, they would be able to incredibly refine their bloodline to the point that they were close to cultivating the bloodline true body. If they could bathe in this endless light for a few days, even the cultivators who had condensed the bloodline true body would unknowingly engrave some simple formation patterns, directly crossing the most difficult step of reaching the level of the dragon ancestor. It was easy to imagine how mysterious this light was. Although this light was wonderful, it was naturally of no use to Luo Fan. Luo Fan took a step forward in the void, and his figure crossed a long distance in a few steps, appearing on the surface of the sphere condensed from yang qi in the center. The endless mysterious light was emitted from this sphere, and even when it reached the edge of this space, it was still bright and dazzling. One could imagine the extent of the light on the surface of this sphere. Luo Fan stood on the surface, and a vacuum area of 30 feet naturally formed around him, completely isolating the surrounding light. Obviously, the intensity of the light on the huge yang and harmony sphere had already surpassed a certain limit, reaching a level where it could naturally trigger the immaculate and flawless barrier within Luo Fan's body. In other words, without the immaculate and flawless barrier, this light would at least be able to injure Luo Fan's body. Looking at the light that blocked all vision from 30 feet away, Luo Fan could not help but secretly exclaim in admiration. What he was admiring was not the light itself, but the condensed body of yang qi under his feet that emitted this light. At this moment, standing on the condensed body of yang qi, Luo Fan truly realized how much yang qi this condensed body contained. He raised his hand and waved slightly. A speck of dust flew up and arrived above his palm. Holding this speck of dust with his hand, Luo Fan instantly felt a slight weight in his hand, but it was no less than 5,000 kilograms. To condense the originally invisible yang qi into such a heavy speck of dust, the yang qi needed was more than 100 times more than all the yang qi that the dragon ancestor had condensed in his entire life. Chapter 610. Luo Fan's thoughts moved slightly, and everything on the surface of the yang harmony sphere with a diameter of tens of thousands of feet was completely included in his senses. In his mind, an extremely detailed sphere directly appeared. This sphere was almost identical to the sphere of yang he under his feet, apart from the light outside. It was precisely because of the loss of the light that the sphere of yang he no longer held back in front of Luo Fan. The surface of the yang qi sphere wasn't as smooth as he had imagined. Instead, It was undulating up and down. There were countless scars on the surface, wrapping the Yang-Chi sphere into a sphere that seemed to be constructed from countless scars. Luo Fan carefully examined these marks, and a look of understanding gradually appeared in his eyes. These traces surprisingly formed an extremely profound formation, forming a formation that fused with the heavens and the earth, and it was able to form some sort of strange communication formation with the Grand Tao. The existence of this formation caused some kind of incomparably mysterious existence to flow out from the Great Tao and pour into the sphere of Yang, He Qi at all times, causing the sphere of Yang, He Qi to undergo some kind of strange transformation, as if it was going to evolve into some kind of even more incredible existence. The countless marks that formed this formation were extremely profound formation runes. Just looking at the formation runes alone, one could tell that they contained endless mysteries. They could conform to some kind of law, and they even faintly resonated with some kind of strange existence in the outside world. They were constantly borrowing some kind of indescribable power to promote the transformation of the sphere of Yang He Qi. These formation runes were the type of formation runes that the many cultivators on the surface of the planet had woven in their bodies when their bloodline true bodies could fuse with the planet. However, compared to the formation runes that were woven in the bodies of the cultivators, the formation runes on the surface of the sphere of Yang, He Qi, were countless times more complicated, and there were countless times more of them. When Luo Fan saw these formation runes, he already understood the relationship between the sphere of Yang He Qi and the many cultivators on the surface of the planet. The many cultivators used the special property of resonating with the sphere of Yang He Qi to maintain their immortality and allow themselves to be reborn at any time. The sphere of Yang He Qi was also borrowing the wisdom of the many cultivators and their power to strive to obtain some kind of secret from the universe. It worked hard to improve itself, allowing its essence to continuously sublimate. Understanding this, Luo Fan finally understood that the sphere of Yang He Qi was probably the incarnation of the planet. Perhaps the spiritual consciousness of the planet was not currently in the sphere of Yang He Qi, but it definitely had an extremely close connection with it. With a thought, Luo Fan probed the interior of the sphere of Yang He Qi. Just as his senses were about to pass through the countless formation runes on the surface of the sphere of Yang He Qi, the countless formation runes suddenly trembled and suddenly erupted with a dazzling light that was 100 times brighter than before. The light was so strong that it even burned the surrounding space into ripples that could be seen with the naked eye. It continuously spread in all directions, causing the layer of earth, fire, and magma in the outside world to churn and then spread out, causing the surface of the entire planet to tremble strangely. It was as if an earthquake had suddenly occurred that affected every inch of the planet. This change caused the cultivators on the surface of the planet to panic. This made Ancestor Xiong and the others feel that the matter was urgent, and they sped up their actions at this moment. A vast will suddenly erupted from the sphere of Yang He Qi. Like a gust of wind sweeping away fallen leaves, it rushed towards Luo Fan. Before Luo Fan could react, it had already made contact with Luo Fan's senses. It even counterattacked, directly affecting his body, causing him to feel an unimaginably powerful push. His entire body flew up and only stopped after he was hundreds of thousands of feet away from the sphere of Yang He Qi. It's finally appeared. When Luo Fan sensed the vast will, there was no panic on his face, nor was there any sense of defeat for being pushed away by a powerful force. Instead, he seemed rather happy, as if he had seen what he had been looking forward to seeing. In fact, if he had not been looking forward to the arrival of this will, why would Luo Fan have tried to probe the sphere of Yang He Qi, and why would he have been pushed away so easily by the will? It must be known that Luo Fan had already cultivated the 3 flowers of the Tao, and his cultivation was so high that even those who had cultivated a few strands of Daoyuo Qi could not defeat him. How could he be easily toyed with by a will? You're not a living being that I created. Who are you, and where did you come from? A tyrannical will was released from the vast will, and with a momentum that could sweep through the heavens and the earth, it wanted to directly invade Luo Fan's sea of consciousness. However, Luo Fan's sea of consciousness was naturally not so easy to invade. With a light block, he had already isolated the will outside. He said, "Fellow cultivator, you're a planet, so you're naturally not something that ordinary living beings can compare to. However, you're not much stronger than me either. Why don't you show yourself?" The vast will was extremely powerful, and it was even more powerful than Luo Fan by 1,000 times. Compared to it, Luo Fan seemed like a tiny ant. However, Luo Fan could easily see from this will that the cultivation level of the existence that possessed this will was at most slightly higher than his. At most, it was equivalent to Taoist Yang Yuan, and it was even inferior to his own body. To ordinary cultivators, this kind of cultivation level might be like a god that could not be resisted, but if Luo Fan wanted to fight it, the chances of him winning were not small. In fact, even if the existence that possessed this will possessed an earth-shattering divine ability that he could not defeat, he was absolutely confident that he could heavily injure it and escape with his life. That was the reason why he said those words. However, in the face of that vast will, Luo Fan was just an ant. At this moment, this ant actually said that he was not much better than himself. This was simply inconceivable to the vast will. If he had the mentality of an ordinary person, or even an ordinary cultivator, he would have flown into a rage out of humiliation and unleashed all his power to tear Luo Fan apart. However, as Luo Fan had expected, this will was the will of the cultivator who had manifested from this planet. Since he'd attained the Tao until now, he'd already experienced countless millions of years of time, and the things he'd seen and heard were abundant to the point of being unimaginable. He'd tempered his Tao heart to the point of perfection and clarity a long time ago, and it wasn't something an ordinary person could compare to. With a soft sound of surprise, he gathered his will, and the boundless light from the Yangqi sphere quickly gathered, gradually condensing into a strange light figure in front of Luo Fan. This light figure was 100,000 feet tall, and the light around it was unimaginably intense. The surrounding space was burned by the concentrated light, forming strange black vortexes. The space was directly twisted into countless fragments, forming spatial black holes one after another. At this moment, the vast will quickly fused into the light figure. The light figure trembled slightly, and its body shrank once again. It quickly shrank from 100,000 feet tall to the height of a normal person. At such a height, the light on his body had weakened by countless times, becoming only slightly bright, revealing a blood-red texture. He looked like an ordinary cultivator who cultivated some kind of light-emitting cultivation method. The spatial black holes around his body had also completely disappeared, as if they had never appeared in the first place. When Luo Fan saw these changes, he was filled with admiration. It was not difficult to understand why the boundless light had gathered into a light figure that was 100,000 feet tall. Although it wasn't something an ordinary person could do, it wasn't too difficult either. However, the difficulty of transforming from a 10,000 feet tall figure of light into a humanoid figure that was only about 10 feet tall and did not emit much light was enough to make all the cultivators on this planet, including the so-called 8 ancestors of men, feel ashamed to death. Even Taoist Yang Yuan might not be able to do it. After all, it required absolute control over light to compress the light figure to this extent. It required every single strand of light to be contained within the figure's body without leaking out at all. The level of control required was unimaginable. The figure was wearing a golden robe at the moment. He had white hair and a youthful face, but he looked like a tall old man. After the old man appeared, he floated in the void and quietly sized up Luo Fan. After a long time, he said, "I almost misjudged you. It turns out that your cultivation has already reached the level of Tao integration. My name is Yin Kong. I was rude just now." Yin Kong, that sounds like a Buddhist name. Luo Fan thought, but he didn't say it out loud. Instead, he said, "So it's Taoist Yin Kong. My name is Luo Fan. I was traveling in the universe and was attracted by the unusually rich Yangtze here, so I landed here. Please forgive me for disturbing you." The old man chuckled and casually pointed down. The countless rays of light that were constantly being produced on the ball of Yangtze suddenly condensed, forming a palace on the surface of the ball of Yangtze. The old man said, "I achieved Tao on a planet, but I still haven't completely left my body. I can't move my body, so I can only travel in the universe with my primordial spirit and train my mind. I'm sorry that I couldn't welcome you earlier." As he spoke, he raised his hand and pointed down. Then, he and Luo Fan landed in the palace that had condensed on the surface of the ball of Yangtze. The ball of Yangtze was constantly emitting endless light. Although the vast will had condensed endless light into this body, it naturally couldn't completely cut off the light emitted by the Yangtze. At this moment, if the light emitted by the ball of Yangtze were to dissipate, it would probably be able to return to the state it was in before the light was condensed. Because of this, the palace that was condensed from countless rays of light was constantly absorbing the endless rays of light, constantly strengthening the essence of the palace, causing it to gradually transform from an illusory existence to an unbreakable and real quality. By the time Luo Fan and the old man landed in the palace had already seemed to be made of metal and stone. There was no longer any trace of illusion. As for the light that occasionally dissipated from the integrated palace, it was directly shaken by the countless formation patterns on the surface of the ball of Yangtze below. Then, it was pressed back into the main body of the building, as if it was being tempered again. Luo Fan looked at the palace and gained some understanding of the old man's cultivation path. Although the palace had only been condensed by the old man's finger, it already contained some of the mysteries of the old man's cultivation. It might be impossible for ordinary cultivators to comprehend, but it was not difficult for Luo Fan. From the palace, Luo Fan had a rough idea that no matter what kind of cultivation system the old man cultivated, his focus was definitely on control. Control Yuan Qi, control the mind, control the body, and control everything that could be controlled. However, this was also very natural. In fact, Luo Fan even felt that if he were the old man in front of him, his final path would definitely be the same. After all, the old man had attained Tao on a planet, and the power he possessed was already earth-shattering. All the cultivators in the universe on Earth, including sages, probably could not compare to him in terms of power. Why would he still need to increase his power? Why would he still need to work hard to absorb Yuan Qi to strengthen himself like ordinary cultivators? Under such circumstances, the best direction for him to cultivate was, of course, control. After the two of them sat down, the old man said, "I've traveled the universe for billions of years, and I once saw a cultivator in an alternate space-time who cultivated a cultivation method similar to yours. I wonder if you came from that alternate space-time?" With that, the old man casually pointed, and a strange place condensed in the void. It seemed to be a starry sky, but there was a strange nebula somewhere in the middle of the starry sky. There seemed to be a strange space-time hidden in the nebula. Waves of strange aura seeped out from the alternate space-time, shocking the universe. The aura itself was not familiar to Luo Fan, but he was very familiar with the characteristics of the aura. It was clearly the aura of a cultivator who had cultivated the golden core of the Khanate Grand Luo realm, or had cultivated the 5 Qis and had set foot on the Holy Road. As soon as Luo Fan looked at the space-time and sensed the waves of aura, he instantly knew that it was a Dong Tian, a Khanate Grand Luo realm cultivator who had cultivated the Khanate Grand Luo realm to resist the erosion of the times. However, the Dong Tian was not the Dong Tian that Taoist Yang Yuan had come from. It was another place that Luo Fan had never heard of, and it was not the Dong Tian that he was originally aiming for. There really is another Dong Tian. Luo Fan's eyes could not help but light up when he saw the starry sky that the old man had condensed. After carefully examining it, Luo Fan shook his head and said, "That is a Dong Tian that was created by a senior cultivator. However, I have never heard of it, and it is not from that Dong Tian. However, Senior's power is admirable. If you could tell me the path to that Dong Tian, I would be very grateful. What's so difficult about that? Since you're interested in going to that Dong Tian, I will naturally make it convenient for you. However, there's an existence that is thousands of times more powerful than me in that Dong Tian. If you want to go there, you must be careful. The old man smiled and casually pointed. Countless rays of light condensed into a small sphere and floated in front of Luo Fan. Luo Fan slightly smiled, bowed to express his gratitude, and received the sphere. The moment he received the sphere, he sensed that there were countless lights and shadows hidden in the sphere. These lights and shadows also represented the path to the universe. However, they were different from the token that Taoist Yang Yuan had given him. These lights and shadows directly displayed the starry sky from an extremely macroscopic perspective. Therefore, they were also based on the distribution of various forces and not the stars or galaxies. The difference was naturally because the old man was a planet, and his views were different from Taoist Yang Yuan's. To Taoist Yang Yuan, the countless stars in the universe were inanimate objects. They were fixed existences that would not change and were naturally the best reference. However, the old man was a planet, and in his eyes, the stars were his own kind. Although most of them were inanimate objects, who knew when they would cultivate consciousness? Who knew when these stars would refine themselves and eventually disappear without a trace? Under such circumstances, how could he use the stars as a reference when he roamed the universe? Naturally, he would only use the more intrinsic, more stable distribution of Yuan Qi as a reference. Luo Fan could not help but sigh in admiration as he scanned the distribution of the Yuan Qi. Even if he did not need to go to that place, just the Yuan Qi distribution map alone was enough to make Luo Fan very satisfied. Although the universe was dominated by the acquired Yuan Qi of the world, there were also many other kinds of Yuan Qi. Although these Yuan Qi were constantly flowing and circulating from a macroscopic perspective, all the Yuan Qi had their own fixed areas of activity, and each kind of Yuan Qi was relatively fixed. Without the Yuan Qi distribution map, Luo Fan would have to rely on luck to find some special spots in the universe. He would have to wander around the universe like a headless fly, hoping to find one day. However, with the Yuan Qi distribution map, the outcome was completely different. Unique locations did not only appear in places where Yuan Qi was more concentrated, but in places where Yuan Qi was more concentrated, it was more likely for some unique locations to appear. If Luo Fan wanted to find those unique locations, he only needed to follow the Yuan Qi distribution map, and he would be able to increase his chances of encountering a unique location by many times. This was obviously the most important thing for Luo Fan at this moment. Chapter 611. The old man chuckled. The old man chuckled and said, "This map is only for me to guide the way. It is fellow Taoist's good fortune to be able to obtain something from it. So why do you need to thank me?" Luo Fan smiled and said, "Fellow Taoist, you don't have to be so modest. This map is so detailed. I'm sure you've put in a lot of effort into it. How can it be just for guiding the way?" The old man smiled and did not say anything. Luo Fan did not ask further. Then he talked about his origin. He condensed a starry sky in the void and revealed the solar system. He explained it to the old man. When the old man saw the star system that Luo Fan had condensed, he came to a sudden realization and said, "So you're from there. I've been to that starry sky during my travels in the universe and stayed there for tens of thousands of years. However, according to what I saw, although there were ancient legacies there were no connate cultivators. Since you grew up in that environment, how could you have the connate essence Qi foundation?" When Luo Fan heard that, he was slightly stunned. He did not expect that the universe was so vast and that the old man had actually been to the solar system in the distant starry sky. When he heard the old man's question, he directly told the old man the reason he had told Taoist Yang Yuan. However, he did not reveal his root cause. The matter of the primordial world was very important. He and the old man had only met by chance and did not understand each other. How could he talk about it so deeply? The old man seemed to have heard the falsehood in Luo Fan's words, but he did not say anything. After all, No matter what the reason was, it was just Luo Fan's own fortuitous encounter. If Luo Fan was willing to tell him, it was naturally because he was honest with him. However, it was reasonable for Luo Fan to be unwilling to tell him. Naturally, it was not appropriate for him to continue asking. After that, they changed the topic and talked about other mysteries of cultivation. The old man had attained the Tao on a planet. Countless races had been born on his body for countless years. Countless intelligent people had diligently sought the Tao on his body, leaving countless traces. His own will had transformed into a primordial spirit to wander the infinite stars and the infinite void. The breadth of his knowledge was truly earth-shattering. Although Luo Fan had the support of 2 universes and his cultivation realm was higher than the old man's, in terms of knowledge, he was still far from the old man's. If it were not for the fact that his main body's cultivation was profound and could see through the essence of everything at a glance and easily analyze the true meaning of the old man's words, the old man would have looked down on him long ago. At this time, it was naturally different. The old man and Luo Fan were constantly talking, and he felt that the person in front of him was the most knowledgeable expert he had encountered in his hundreds of millions of years of life. No matter what he said, no matter how mysterious and strange it was, as long as he said it, the person in front of him would definitely be able to find the reason and analyze it clearly and logically. The old man could not help but be convinced. Even if there were some mysterious and strange things that were beyond his imagination, the person would definitely be able to talk about some thoughts that would make him feel enlightened and gain a lot. He would even want to personally go to the place where the mysterious qi was to test it out. Under such circumstances, the more he talked with Luo Fan, the brighter his eyes became and the happier his expression became. The various experiences revealed became more and more. The old man felt that he had gained a lot, but Luo Fan's gains were not any less than the old man's. In fact, it was much more than the old man's. The old man's knowledge was truly too vast. In the hundreds of millions of years after he had cultivated his soul sense, the old man had traveled to countless stars and seen all kinds of strange sceneries in the universe. Most of the strange sceneries in the universe were manifested from some kind of principle of the Earth's universe and contained some of the mysteries of the great Tao of the Earth's universe. And the old man's casual words were all the key points of these strange sceneries, pointing straight to the source of the profound mysteries of the universe. This allowed Luo Fan to grasp the veins of the strange sceneries more directly than seeing them with his own eyes. He knew the source of the profound mysteries of the universe. For Luo Fan, it was as if the old man had used his vast knowledge to guide Luo Fan to comprehend the infinite mysteries of the Great Way in the endless starry sky of the Earth's universe. For Luo Fan, one could imagine how great the harvest was. Rapid Update both of them felt that they were on good terms with each other and gained a lot from it. Naturally, this kind of relationship would continue unabated. According to their current cultivation realm, it would not be difficult for them to maintain this state for thousands or tens of thousands of years. It would also not make them feel tired. Just like that, time passed by slowly. In the blink of an eye, 3 years had passed. These 3 years were like the blink of an eye in the eyes of Luo Fan and the old man. They did not have any concept of it at all. However, to the many cultivators on the surface of the planet, these 3 years were as long as tens of thousands of years. This was because, ever since the earthquake that shook the entire planet 3 years ago, the yang qi on the surface of the planet had been declining at an unimaginable speed. Almost every day, he could feel that the density of the yang qi had decreased compared to the previous day. Just like that, 3 years had passed, and today, the amount of yang qi on the surface of the planet had been reduced to 1/10 of its original amount. Although it was still dense compared to before, it was like the difference between heaven and earth. This caused many living beings who had never worried about the changes in the world and the loss of vitality to feel an indescribable sense of panic. It was as if they could faintly feel that a great change was about to occur in the world. When this happened, the cultivators of the world became anxious and annoyed. Countless waves of blood were set off for the spiritual land. This was natural. The 8 ancestors of men accelerated their original plan. They did not care about the cost and compressed the preparation work that would have taken decades to complete into a few years. The reason why the yang qi on the surface of the planet was constantly dissipating and decreasing was because of the old man who called himself Yin Kong. The reason why the yang qi on the entire planet was so dense was because the old man had used the power of the planet to continuously attract the endless yang qi from the void of the universe to condense. It was not a natural phenomenon, nor was it the manifestation of some kind of profound way in the universe. Since it was not a natural phenomenon, and it was not the manifestation of the profound way, it naturally needed some kind of power to maintain its state. It needed some kind of power to resist the Earth's universe and return the yang qi to the void and the rules of balance. That power was emitted by the yang qi at the center of the planet. It was the mysterious light produced by the burning of the yang qi. In reality, these rays of light were none other than the harmonious yang sphere condensing pure yang qi and transforming the yang qi into its own power. It burned the remaining power left behind by the harmonious yang sphere. Although it was formed by the burning of residual energy, the amount of yang qi that the ball of yang qi had absorbed was unimaginable. Even the residual energy that was not suitable for cultivation was still an unbelievable number. Moreover, even if the residual energy was not suitable for the old man's cultivation, it was only because of the difference in quality. The quality of the energy itself was still extremely high. With such a large amount of energy that was extremely high in quality, when it was burned and turned into light, it naturally possessed all sorts of unbelievable power. Condensing the yang qi and preventing the yang qi from naturally dissipating under the influence of the rules of the Earth's universe was just a power that it should have. From this, it could be seen that as long as the planet continued to cultivate and absorb yang qi, it would naturally produce this kind of light. It would naturally dissipate and seep into the body of the planet, producing some kind of inexplicable, mysterious power. This allowed the endless yang qi that had accumulated on the surface of the planet to remain concentrated and not dissipate under the influence of the rules of nature. This allowed the planet to maintain such a dense yang qi and maintain a state that was suitable for cultivators to cultivate. It was a pity that 3 years ago, when Luo Fan entered the center of the planet, the will of the planet had sensed something and returned. It condensed the light from the ball of yang qi into its avatar and continuously compressed the endless light from the ball of yang qi to construct the vast palace. It used the endless light that had been emitted at all times over the past 3 years to continuously deepen the quality of the palace. Under these circumstances, although the ball of yang qi was constantly producing dazzling light that contained endless power, none of the light could seep into the body of the planet. There was no light that could help the planet resist the power that caused the yang qi to dissipate. Naturally, the yang qi on the surface of the planet could only continuously dissipate. The rules of the Earth's universe were to take away surpluses and make up for deficits. The denser the yang qi, the faster it dissipated. Just like this, 90% of the yang qi had dissipated in a short 3 years, causing the density of the yang qi on the surface of the planet to only reach 1/10 of its original density. At this time, although the speed at which the yang qi dissipated had slowed down, it was still constantly dissipating. According to calculations, perhaps in another 30 years, the yang qi would return to 1/10 of its original density. In another 300 years, perhaps it would return to 1/10 of its original density, 100th of its current density, or 1,000th of its original density 3 years ago. At that time, the density of the yang qi on the planet might not be much different from that of other regions. Even if it was still somewhat dense, it would no longer be able to trigger the rules of the Earth's universe. However, at that time, it could be predicted that because there would not be enough yang qi for cultivators to cultivate, the unimaginably prosperous cultivation world would decline to a state similar to the Earth, and that would be entering the age of chaos. The current of the times was just like that, surging and surging, yet silent and undetectable. Such a prosperous cultivation world might perish because of a small reason, because of a small change in the thinking of a certain existence. The arrival of a new era did not have any great signs. With just a little change in the source, it would be enough to achieve the final result. Perhaps this was still a sign. It seemed that as long as the old man made a slight change and dispersed the infinite light into the celestial body of the planet again, this result would naturally be changed. The yang qi would be gathered again, and a prosperous cultivation world would be created again. However, that was almost impossible. Once the flow of the times surged, it was almost unstoppable. Since the old man on the planet had already set off the flow of the times, causing the flow of the times to be triggered, there would naturally be endless mysterious power added to his body, creating all kinds of seemingly coincidental and accidental accidents, making it impossible for him to return to the past. He could only continue walking like this, finally causing the end of the cultivation era and the arrival of the age of chaos. The reason behind this was so mysterious that even the saints of the era of saints could not stop it. It contained the most profound mystery of the Earth's universe. Neither Luo Fan nor the old man noticed the changes on the surface of the planet. In fact, they did not care at all. Whether it was Luo Fan or the old man, they were both people with extremely firm Taoist hearts. Although the two had different experiences, they had both cultivated for a long time and were both in some kind of bottleneck. They also saw in each other the opportunity that seemed to be able to break through their bottlenecks. Under such circumstances, even if the world was destroyed, they would never give up on this kind of flow, not to mention that it was only a decrease in the concentration of some kind of vitality on the surface of the planet. Not to mention that they did not have the mood to sense the changes on the surface of the planet. Even if they sensed it and guessed it, they would not make any changes. In the blink of an eye, another few months passed. On this day, when Luo Fan mentioned the Tao of a certain primordial golden Dan, the old man was suddenly stunned. His face was full of shock, and the light from his body continued to shine. His whole body gradually turned into a light man, and, at the same time, it continued to expand. In a short while, it had already grown to a height of 10,000 feet. With one look, Luo Fan knew that the old man had understood something from his words and was currently making some kind of unimaginable breakthrough. As he secretly envied the old man, his body trembled slightly, and he took a few steps back. He was already several 100,000 feet away. The palace was extremely tall, and it could even change its height at any time. Although it was a little difficult to accommodate a giant that was 10,000 feet tall, it was not impossible. As a result, the old man directly changed his figure in the palace and began making a breakthrough. With Luo Fan's ability, even if he came into direct contact with a figure of light that was tens of thousands of feet tall, he would not feel the slightest bit of discomfort. However, at this moment, the old man was making a breakthrough, and while they were chatting happily, Luo Fan did not want to disturb the old man. As such, he retreated and watched the old man from afar, allowing the old man to make a breakthrough without any interference. When Luo Fan moved several 100,000 feet away, the light man that the old man had turned into suddenly collapsed. The vast will once again spread out and filled the entire interior of the palace. The boundless light that the light man had turned into directly fused into the palace, causing the palace's strength to increase once again. It revealed an indescribable bronze luster, and it even gave off a simple and unadorned aura. Luo Fan looked at the palace, and a thought flashed through his mind. He seemed to faintly feel that there was another strange aura hidden deep within the simple and unadorned aura. That aura was extremely unfamiliar to Luo Fan, but at the same time, it was also somewhat familiar. It was like a certain aura that he had heard of in the legends. This is the aura of Buddha. Suddenly, a bolt of lightning flashed through Luo Fan's mind. Luo Fan instantly understood the origin of this aura. This was clearly the legendary Buddha. This person's name is Yin Kong, and he has the aura of Buddha. He must have some sort of connection with the legendary Buddha. Luo Fan thought again and thought even more. At this moment, at the edge of the hole in the center of the planet, the layer of magma that contained endless earth fire baleful chi continued to churn. Suddenly, one strange creature after another tore open the layer of magma and rushed out. These strange creatures came in all shapes and sizes. There were dragons, tigers, lions, leopards, bears, phoenixes. There were all sorts of strange creatures, including almost all the creatures that had ever appeared on this planet. Among them, the strongest ones were the 8 living beings at the front. A flood dragon that was tens of thousands of feet tall, a giant bear that was dozens of feet tall, a phoenix that was draped in 9 colors, a white tiger that was exuding a boundless killing aura, a 9-headed bug that had a strange and unpredictable appearance, a world tree that was tens of thousands of feet tall and seemed to contain countless worlds, a strange beast that was shaped like a rabbit but seemed to be shuttling between the realms of yin and yang, a lush and boundless patch of strange grass that seemed to envelop heaven and earth. This was the image of the bloodline true body of the 8 ancestors of cultivation. However, it wasn't their bloodline true body that was here. Instead, it was a body that was 10,000 times stronger than their bloodline true body, and it was formed by relying on various strange magic tools to condense boundless energy. Behind them, the boundless beasts were of all shapes and sizes, but they were no different from the 8 types that the 8 ancestors represented. Moreover, their bodies were formed by relying on some kind of magic tool to condense energy. Even though the nature of these magic tools was countless times weaker than the magic tools condensed by the 8 ancestors, they were still able to exert unimaginable might. After these practically boundless beasts appeared, they dispersed and condensed into a strange grand formation in the sky. This grand formation used the magic tools as the formation's core, and it constructed numerous mysterious formation markings that combined the quantity of all the beasts together. It instantly broke through a strange bottleneck and condensed a strand of energy that was almost at the innate golden immortal realm after attaining the acupoint and 5 Chi's unification. This strand of energy shook the heavens and the earth, and it even shook the entire planet to the point of shaking violently. It caused the originally enormous hole in the center of the planet to seem as if it was instantly filled up, and it was enveloped by the might of this strand of energy. Luo Fan looked from afar, and he couldn't help but sigh to himself. So that's what they're planning. If the planet's will hadn't returned and was still roaming the void of the universe, leaving only its body here, they might really have succeeded. Unfortunately, not only has the planet's will returned, it's also in the process of breaking through, and it's at its peak state. Chapter 6:12. When one's power reached a certain level, it would naturally change its form. Even an existence that was originally formless would take on a form that was compatible with the great Tao. At this moment, this power that was even comparable to a connate perfected heavenly realm cultivator had naturally far surpassed that limit. In an instant, an extremely strange existence that had a human form, but the various details of its body contained the characteristics of a certain beast condensed above the huge formation. This existence was around 300,000 meters tall. Even in this enormous hole at the center of the planet, it could be considered to be rather huge, and it was definitely not insignificant. Such an existence was naturally much smaller than the numerous beasts added together. Even the area it occupied was much smaller than the formation core formed by the beasts. However, what was extremely strange was that when this existence appeared, the numerous beasts and the huge formation instantly weakened to a point where they were practically non-existent. Any living beings that came here would only notice this existence, and they would not notice the source of this existence, the huge formation. This existence was clearly the image that was naturally manifested from the power condensed by the formation that was compatible with the great Tao. After the existence appeared, its eyes flickered slightly, and an unfathomable intelligence shone from its eyes. In an instant, there seemed to be boundless light flashing through its eyes, as if the existence's intelligence had grown from a hazy state to a state where it could see through all the profundities of the universe. In the end, The light in the existence's eyes froze, and an indescribable joy appeared in its eyes. It lowered its head and looked at the huge formation that formed its body. With a casual point of its finger, a formless ripple gathered towards the center from all directions, instantly sweeping through the countless strange living beings that formed the entire formation. After the ripple swept through, the huge formation shrunk and quickly floated towards the existence. In the blink of an eye, it had shrunk to several thousand meters in radius, easily entering the existence's chest and replacing its heart. Following that, an earth-shattering aura surged into the sky, shaking space and the planet, causing the entire planet to shake violently. At the same time, that existence's body started to condense and shrink, gradually shrinking from 100,000 feet to 16 feet. Although it was much taller than an ordinary person, it was already on the same level. His body had been compressed to such an extent, and his power had become tens of thousands of times more condensed. He no longer seemed illusory like before when he was completely condensed from power. Instead, his body seemed to be made of flesh and blood, and every detail of his body was real, without the slightest hint of illusory. This change was extremely profound, and Luo Fan's eyes lit up. Even though he'd guessed that a tremendous change would occur after that strand of energy was raised to the level of a golden immortal realm cultivator, he'd never imagined that this change would actually be so great. It was practically like the creation of a practically omnipotent golden immortal realm cultivator that possessed extraordinary ability, boundless might, and boundless ability. This kind of existence even made Luo Fan feel that he did not have any confidence in facing him, as if he could be destroyed by him at any time. This sort of feeling caused Luo Fan to feel dejected, yet at the same time, he felt indescribably delighted. The profundities of the golden immortal realm was the one and only objective that Luo Fan pursued tirelessly in this universe. When facing this existence that was similar to a golden immortal realm cultivator before him, even though it was extremely likely that he would be casually annihilated by this existence, this sort of risk might allow him to peek into the profundities of the golden immortal realm, and it would allow him to directly attain his final objective of coming to this universe. How could he not feel dejected and delighted at the same time? That existence naturally disregarded Luo Fan's thoughts, and it floated in space before its body shook, and then a robe appeared out of thin air. The process of this robe's appearance was extremely profound, and it naturally revealed the profundities of creation. It contained some sort of method of utilizing energy that Luo Fan was unable to understand. Luo Fan seemed to have comprehended something when he saw this. However, he only seemed to have comprehended something. He seemed to still lack some sort of key to truly comprehend it, and this key seemed to be the fundamental reason why he was unable to truly comprehend the profundities of the golden immortal realm. I was able to be born because there's something within this planet that can annihilate all living beings on this planet. Based on this, I'm indebted to you, said the existence with a faint smile on its face as it spoke. Those words were clearly directed at the enormous ball of harmonious yang that was brewing some sort of great change at the center. The existence's words did not contain any power, but as soon as it spoke, some sort of fluctuation naturally flashed through space, and the mysteries of the universe naturally added some sort of indescribable power to it, causing boundless light and shadows to flash through the voice, allowing anyone who heard the voice to be able to sense the intent within the voice. With such profundities, the voice was naturally able to easily pass through the distant space and directly enter the ears of Luo Fan and the old man on the ball of harmonious yang. It's just that the purpose of my birth is to eliminate hidden dangers. So even though I'm indebted to you, I still have to do what I have to do, said the existence with a smile. As he spoke, he lifted his foot and took a step forward. Without any fluctuations, it was as if he had fused with an existence deeper than space itself. He crossed a long distance and arrived at the center of the void, right above the sphere of yang and harmony. It was only several 100,000 feet away from Luo Fan. This existence did not care about Luo Fan at all. It did not even glance at Luo Fan, only focusing on the ball of harmonious yang below. As for Luo Fan, he did not do anything in response to this existence's arrival. He did not help the old man he had been chatting with deal with him, nor did he help him deal with the old man. He only watched quietly like a bystander. The reason why he did this was because he knew that this existence could not succeed. No matter how powerful this existence seemed right now, even if it seemed like it could casually destroy the old man and him, in the end, it would definitely lose. This was not just because this existence's appearance went against the tide of time and would definitely be drowned by the tide of time. The fundamental reason was that this existence was currently within the old man's body. The old man's cultivation realm might be slightly lower than this existence's, but the old man's power far surpassed this existence's by who knew how many times. Moreover, this power itself was faintly under the old man's control. Under these circumstances, he could not find any possibility of the old man failing, nor could he see any reason why the old man needed him to help defend. Under such circumstances, how could Luo Fan recklessly make a move? Luo Fan watched quietly, paying full attention to the existence's presence and the changes in the surroundings caused by its every action. After carefully sensing it, Luo Fan could not help but feel slightly disappointed. Although this existence's strength belonged to the category of innate Grand Luo, he was not a true innate Grand Luo after all. All of his cultivation, divine abilities, and everything else came from that power. Comprehension. The profundities of the Grand Luo and the profundities of the Grand Luo did not exist to him at all. Although this existence was peerlessly powerful and was at least countless times stronger than the innate filthy golden core, triple converge prominence, and 5-cheese unification, there was still an unimaginable gap when compared to a true innate Grand Luo. At the very least, it was practically impossible for Luo Fan to comprehend the profundities of the Grand Luo from him. With this in mind, how could Luo Fan not be disappointed? Since this existence was not a true innate Grand Luo, Luo Fan was even more certain that this existence would definitely not be able to defeat the old man. He even started to watch silently from the side without any burden. Right at this moment, a strand of Buddhist chanting erupted from the palace the old man resided in. Boundless golden light suddenly emanated from the depths of space, and it instantly enveloped an area of 50,000 kilometers around the ball of yang and harmony. It was even to the extent that Luo Fan and the existence were enveloped within it. As he was enveloped by the golden light and listened to the indistinct Buddhist chanting, Luo Fan suddenly felt his heart become unprecedentedly calm. A feeling of perfection and enlightenment enveloped his entire body, and it caused him to seem as if he'd instantly seen through life and death, the cycle of reincarnation in the heavens and the earth, and the vicissitudes of the universe. This sort of feeling was so miraculous that Luo Fan was practically unable to restrain himself from being immersed in it. However, it was only practically in the end. After an instant, Luo Fan understood that this sort of feeling was illusory. Or perhaps it was illusory to him. Buddha. At this moment, only this word was circulating within Luo Fan's mind. Luo Fan's feeling of perfection and enlightenment was due to his goodwill towards the old man. The golden light naturally guided him to comprehend the old man's realm of Tao. However, the existence had indescribable malice towards the old man, so it was naturally impossible for him to be guided by the golden light. Instead, he was endlessly suppressed by the golden light. The existence's expression changed the moment he was enveloped by the golden light. In that instant, the power that formed his origin was suppressed by an even more vast and terrifying power. His entire body felt an indescribable pain. His entire body twisted violently under the indescribable pain, as if he was about to disintegrate. This is power? A look of surprise appeared on the being's face as it cried out, but it didn't reveal too much panic. At the same time, he raised his hand and grabbed out. An invisible domain naturally condensed in the void, directly enveloping an area with a radius of 100 feet around his body. The golden light that was coming at him from all directions was completely blocked outside, unable to invade it at all. Even though the existence was only an existence that was similar to the innate golden immortal realm, it didn't possess the cultivation of a true innate golden immortal realm cultivator, and it didn't possess the comprehension of a true innate golden immortal realm cultivator. Even then, it possessed a certain aspect of an innate golden immortal realm cultivator, so it was naturally able to fuse with the Grand Tao and utilize the might of the Grand Tao to possess unbelievable might. Even though the essence of the golden light was extremely noble, it was emitted unintentionally in the end, and it wasn't a true attack. So, it was naturally easily obstructed by the existence. However, even if it managed to block the golden light, the existence was also obstructed by the golden light. It lost the opportunity to attack the sphere of harmony and could only quietly wait for the changes to come to an end within the golden light, waiting for it to make a move. Right at this moment, the ball of yang and harmony slowly shrunk. This shrinking was not compression, but an extremely mysterious and profound transformation of its form from the original ball of yang and harmony into an existence that was even smaller. It was precisely because of this transformation that it seemed to be shrinking continuously. After isolating the influence of the golden light, Luo Fan had already shifted his attention from the existence to the ball of yang and harmony. With his knowledge, he could naturally easily tell that the appearance of the golden light meant that the old man was about to undergo some sort of great transformation, so he couldn't help but pay attention to it. At this moment, as he watched the ball of yang and harmony shrink, there seemed to be countless shadows, words, and patterns flashing through his eyes. The process of the ball shrinking seemed to have been broken down into countless steps, and the little changes within flowed through his mind like flowing water, allowing him to comprehend the entire process of transformation as if he was there. The eyes that Luo Fan brought with him from his main body were naturally the biggest reason for this, but apart from that, the old man was kind of Luo Fan, so naturally, he directly revealed the process of his transformation to Luo Fan. If not for the combination of these two, Luo Fan wouldn't have been able to feel like he was there. Luo Fan having this ability was clearly beyond the old man's expectations. If he had expected that the process of revealing the transformation would make Luo Fan feel like he was there, no matter how open-minded the old man was, and no matter how great Luo Fan's kindness to him was, he would never reveal it. After all, to a cultivator, these were the greatest secrets that even their destiny-linked partners couldn't fully grasp. However, there were no ifs in this world. Under the old man's misunderstanding, Luo Fan was able to easily experience the old man's breakthrough process as if he was on the spot. In a trance, Luo Fan seemed to see an indescribable great Tao unfolding in front of him. The process of the ball of yang and harmony's transformation seemed to be evolving this great Tao. Every tiny change contained indescribable rich meaning, and every transformation of the yang qi contained a certain truth that he had been diligently seeking in the past. Under such circumstances, during the process of the ball of yang and harmony's transformation, Luo Fan seemed to see an even vaster door opening in front of him. This door was tall and majestic, leading to an unfathomable world and an indescribable realm. This realm was even higher than the grand heavenly realm, and it seemed to be even more profound than the Tao fruit of the grand heavenly realm. However, it was not the grand heavenly realm, nor was it the Tao fruit of the grand heavenly realm. Instead, it seemed to be another cultivation system. It was another supreme realm that was similarly profound and could encompass the entire universe. Buzz, a sound that sounded like a great bell, suddenly reverberated in Luo Fan's mind. In a trance, Luo Fan seemed to see a Buddha sitting cross-legged in the middle of the universe. The Buddha's face was benevolent, revealing the true meaning of the past, present, and future. His body was wrapped in ribbons of light formed by river systems, and below him was a vast lotus platform. His eyes seemed to be closed, and there were billions of circles of light behind his head, evolving into billions of living beings billions of worlds and billions of worlds. All of a sudden, Luo Fan seemed to feel some strange existence naturally condensing in the depths of his spirit. Faintly, he felt that the Buddha seemed to have glanced at him, and his entire body tensed up like an ant being looked at by a divine dragon. This feeling passed in a flash, and when he took a closer look, the Buddha's eyes and face did not change at all. The feeling of being glanced at seemed to be an illusion. Suddenly, as light and shadow flashed, Luo Fan had already returned to the hole inside the planet, and the Buddha he saw previously was nowhere to be seen. The originally overwhelming golden light had already disappeared without a trace. Along with the disappearance of the golden light, the huge sphere of Yang he also disappeared. At this moment, in the place where the sphere of Yang he was, a Buddha sat cross-legged on the lotus platform, completely replacing the sphere. The Buddha's face was benevolent, and there were dozens of circles of light behind his head, within which all living beings were evolving. His body emitted an aura of perfection and enlightenment. Although he was sitting cross-legged, he seemed to have transcended the universe, the world, and the great Tao, as if he was independent of the world. If he had seen this Buddha in the past, Luo Fan would have been shocked, but at this moment he only felt a sense of loss and even regret. This was because although this Buddha was earth-shattering compared to the Buddha he saw in a trance before, who sat cross-legged in the center of the universe, surrounded by light belts formed by river systems, and had billions of worlds and world behind his head, he was billions of times inferior. It was almost like comparing an ant to a god of creation. How could it make Luo Fan feel shocked? Just as Luo Fan was secretly feeling pity, the Buddha suddenly smiled, pointed his left hand to the sky and his right hand to the ground, and said, "In the heavens and on the earth, I am the only one." As soon as he finished speaking, a bridge of light suddenly stepped out of nothingness, directly arriving in front of him. The Buddha stood up and stood in front of the bridge of light. He turned his head and said to Luo Fan, "It's all thanks to fellow Taoists that I was able to achieve enlightenment today. This bridge contains everything I've seen and heard in my life. I'm unable to express my gratitude fully. Please forgive me, fellow Taoist." As soon as the voice left his mouth, there was a natural response from the great Tao. Those who heard the voice naturally saw countless lights and shadows, expressing the will contained in the voice. As he spoke, he raised his hand, and a finger-sized hard golden block appeared out of thin air in front of Luo Fan. It floated in the air, waiting for Luo Fan to pick it up. Luo Fan smiled faintly and said, "That's not necessary. Fellow Taoist success is due to your lifetime of cultivation achievements. What does that have to do with me?" He was truly ashamed to accept this item. Besides, I've already obtained enormous benefits from fellow Taoists, so this item is no longer of any use to me. Since you have no use for it, why don't you hand it over to me? Before the Buddha could speak, a voice interrupted and took over the conversation. Chapter 652, the Buddha. Chapter 652, the Buddha. Chapter 613. As soon as these words entered his ears, Luo Fan instantly knew who it was. Apart from the shocking existence condensed by the formation, how could there be anyone else? Following that, the void fluctuated, and a strange power beyond Luo Fan's understanding appeared out of thin air around the hard golden block. It wrapped around the hard golden block and directly cut off the connection between the hard golden block and the Buddha. Following that, the power shook and disappeared without a trace along with the hard block. When he reappeared, he was right in front of that existence. The being smiled and reached out with his right hand, ready to grab the golden block with one hand. The expression on the being's face did not change at all during this process, as if it was doing something that was the most natural thing to do. Luo Fan did not react to this at all, nor did he have any plans to make a move. It was basically impossible for him to defeat this being with the strength of this clone of his in this universe. After all, this being was condensed from a strand of energy that was equivalent to a connate golden heavenly realm cultivator, and its height was countless times higher than Luo Fan's clone. However, This did not mean that Luo Fan did not have the ability to stop this existence's actions. This was because his comprehension of the rune system had already reached an earth-shattering level. Although the essence of this existence was extremely high, it only had power and not comprehension, so it was not perfect. It had many flaws that could be exploited by Luo Fan. These flaws could not help Luo Fan defeat this existence, but they could allow him to gain some advantage over this existence. However, even though he was confident that he could stop that existence. Luo Fan knew that at this moment, it was not his turn to make a move. Sure enough, just as the being's right hand was about to grab the golden block, the Buddha, who was about to step onto the bridge of light, uttered a Buddhist chant and raised his right hand to slap at the being. In an instant, an indescribably terrifying power appeared out of thin air 30 feet above the being's head. It pressed down at an unimaginable speed towards the being. The being raised his brows, but his expression did not change at all. He moved his body upwards, and the silhouettes of countless strange beasts appeared out of thin air above him, and they charged towards the power that had appeared out of thin air. Although these strange beasts were only silhouettes, they seemed as if they were real. Every single one of them emanated an earth-shattering aura, and every single silhouette emanated a powerful pressure that could destroy everything. The countless strange beasts were densely packed, and they continuously charged upwards like flowing water. During this process, the distance of 3 feet above the being's head seemed to have extended by billions of times, and it was as if a vast world had replaced that distance. However, this world wasn't the illusory world that had appeared when Luo Fan collided with the dragon ancestor. It was a real world that possessed boundless matter, boundless power, countless laws, and even the projection of the great Tao. In this world, the countless strange beasts seemed as if they had gained real bodies, and they had stepped out of nothingness and became real. Even their numbers seemed to have increased by billions of times in that instant. They filled the entire world, and the power that erupted from them seemed to be enough to destroy the world. However, in contrast, the power that the Buddha had unleashed only circulated in the air, turning into 5 towering mountains that pressed down towards the army of strange beasts. Although the mountains were tall and majestic, they paled in comparison to the countless strange beasts. Anyone who saw them would wonder if the 5 mountains would be torn to pieces the moment they came into contact with the strange beasts. However, the outcome was unexpected, or perhaps it could be said to be reasonable. In the instant the mountains came into contact with the army of strange beasts, the power unleashed by the Buddha shattered the countless beasts. The army of strange beasts looked like moths flying into a flame. No matter how many strange beasts charged into the 5 mountains, they were instantly shattered by the 5 mountains. They couldn't put up any resistance at all. This change was like a battle between 2 existences of completely different levels. The difference between the 2 was so great that it was simply incomprehensible. The existence originally had a smile on his face, as if everything was under his control. He had a calm expression, and he even had his left hand behind his back, looking extremely relaxed. But at this moment, when this change occurred, the expression on the existence's face changed drastically, and it went from being extremely composed to shock and panic. How can this be? Although you're powerful, you're on the same level as me. The power you unleashed is definitely not stronger than the power I unleashed, so why is there such a huge difference? The existence cried out in shock. The voice was filled with endless confusion, as if it would not die in peace if it did not obtain an answer. Do you still think of yourself as a real cultivator? Although you possess the power of a Buddha, it's only power. How can you compare to a real Buddha? The Buddha smiled. In an instant, the 5 mountains had completely annihilated all the exotic beasts in the surroundings. Then they blasted the heavens and earth apart, directly pressing down on the existence. The existence was constantly being pressed down, causing the location of the existence to continuously approach the center of the planet. The existence's body struggled desperately during this process. It resisted desperately, but no matter how much it struggled and resisted, Even if it used all the power of the Great Path it could mobilize, even if it created countless worlds around its body, even if it used the formation it had condensed to erupt with power thousands of times greater than its own, it could not stop this process. It could only continue to get closer to the center of the planet, and it could only be confined under the 5 mountains. After a few breaths, the 5 mountains had already pressed the existence to the center of the planet. Then, with a sudden tremble, they split apart with a loud bang, and then merged inwards, instantly splitting into 5 directions, directly sealing the existence at the center of the planet. That existence continued to struggle, and the power that erupted from it became more and more astonishing, more and more terrifying. It even reached a point where the entire planet could not withstand it, causing the 5 mountains to undulate and shake continuously, as if they could be shaken and destroyed at any time. However, the Buddha did not care about this at all. He just quietly watched with a smile on his face. As the Buddha did all these, the bridge of light was like a real bridge that had existed since ancient times. It lay in front of him, quietly waiting for him. It did not change, even though he had stayed on the bridge for a long time. Don't struggle, don't struggle. The more you struggle, the more condensed and real the 5 mountains will become, and the tighter the pressure will be. The Buddha chuckled. If you want to kill me, then kill me. If you want to leave, then leave. Why are you suppressing me like this? The existence that was being suppressed roared. You are a force condensed from the many cultivators on the surface of the planet. The purpose of your existence is probably not to go against me, but to eliminate the hidden danger that can destroy all the cultivators on the surface of the planet. Right? The Buddha smiled. That's right. A sigh came from the center of the suppression that was separated from the 5 directions. If that's the case, isn't it the best choice for you to stay here? The Buddha smiled faintly. What do you mean? The voice was puzzled and asked. These 5 mountains are formed from my power. They contain the essence of this planet and exist in the center of this planet. If there is a source of power, they will naturally continue to grow. In the end, they will eventually fill up this hole and make this planet whole again. They will also be able to produce countless formation patterns as time passes, and they will be able to merge with the cultivators on the surface of the planet. For cultivators, the only difference between me and them is that they will not have consciousness and will not take the initiative to control the life and death of the living beings. In this way, doesn't it eliminate the hidden danger that you are worried about? The Buddha said, I see. The voice that came from the bottom of the 5 mountains seemed to have come to a sudden realization. After the voice came out, the 5 mountains stopped shaking. It was as if the existence had accepted its fate and was no longer resisting. Luo Fan just watched quietly from the side as the Buddha and that existence fought. He didn't do anything at all. He did not say anything either. It was as if everything that was happening before him had nothing to do with him. Before Yin Kong broke through, he was roughly at the 3 flowers at one's prominence and 5 chis collecting a mind. Although he did not cultivate the golden core cultivation method, his realm could be described as such. After the earth-shattering breakthrough, just now, he had directly skipped the 3 flowers at one's prominence and 5 chis collecting in mind. He had directly reached a supreme realm that was similar to the Khanate Grand Luo cultivation method. This supreme realm was something that Luo Fan yearned for even in his dreams. However, he still couldn't see any trace of it until now. It was so powerful that it simply exceeded the imagination of all living beings. Even in terms of the essence of power, it was already at the same level as the power that the formation formed by the 8 ancestors of cultivation formed. Moreover, he had much more comprehension of the Grand Tao, understanding of the laws of the universe on Earth, and countless more unbelievable divine abilities than that existence. Under such circumstances, Yin Kong had an unimaginable advantage over the existence condensed from that power. The outcome of the battle between the two was obvious at a glance. However, even if there was a huge gap between them, the battle between the two was still within the scope of the Khanate Grand Luo cultivation method. The profundities revealed in the battle were all manifestations of the profundities of the Grand Luo cultivation method. If one were to extrapolate it, one would be able to deduce the true profundities of the grand Luo cultivation method. Under such circumstances, Luo Fan would only place his attention on the process of the battle and would not waste his energy to care about anything else. At this moment, when the existence seemed to have accepted its fate and stopped struggling, he faintly felt that something was wrong. There seemed to be some sort of mysterious power in the surrounding space that could not be sensed or grasped through any known channels, and it was emanating an indescribable fluctuation that was condensing at the center of the five mountains. Luo Fan did not sense the condensing of this power at all. However, the three flowers in his sea of consciousness trembled slightly and warned Luo Fan, causing an indescribable feeling of vigilance to arise in Luo Fan's mind. When this feeling of vigilance appeared, Luo Fan did not hesitate at all. With a thought, he took a step forward, and his figure instantly traversed a great distance to appear in the layer of lava around the hole. The layer of lava was an insurmountable chasm for the cultivators on this planet. However, for Luo Fan, who possessed the flawless, immaculate technique, it was no different from an ordinary environment. He did not feel uncomfortable at all when he was in it, and he even felt that the vigilance that appeared out of nowhere in his mind had instantly weakened to an undetectable level. The moment Luo Fan stood still in the layer of lava, the five mountains at the center of the hole suddenly shook, and an indescribable fluctuation was produced. The fluctuation spread in all directions, and the space that was swept by the fluctuation shattered into pieces. It turned into spatial dust that was hundreds of millions of times finer and denser than the spatial dust that the dragon ancestor had created. The spatial dust was so small that it was unimaginable. Even with the powerful recovery ability of the Earth's universe, it could not condense the spatial dust into a complete space. It could only let the spatial dust spread in all directions and gradually disappear without a trace. The shattered spatial dust was directly replaced by countless huge ring-shaped spatial black holes. These spatial black holes were arranged around the five mountains, and they were like countless huge mouths that devoured all energy, power, and matter. It was as if they wanted to completely devour everything in the universe to fill up the holes. Under this unparalleled, devouring power, even the layer of lava that was quite far away from the black holes continued to churn. Occasionally, wisps of earth fire would even be sucked out and thrown into the countless spatial black holes at the center. The number of spatial black holes continued to increase as the strange fluctuation spread. The suction force also continued to increase, and the amount of energy and matter it absorbed continued to increase. In the blink of an eye, the black holes had already reached where Buddha Yin Kong was. Just as they were about to devour Buddha Yin Kong, they were also twisted into countless energy and matter to fill up the holes. However, at that moment, Buddha Yin Kong chanted the name of Buddha, and the smile on his face was no longer there. He raised his hand and waved it gently. A golden light flew out from the back of his head, accompanied by endless Sanskrit chants. Like a giant invisible hand, it directly froze the space, completely canceling out the fluctuation that was constantly spreading in all directions and creating spatial black holes. The golden light that was accompanied by Sanskrit chants contained boundless might, as if it had already transcended the Earth's universe. It gave off an aura that could not be eliminated even if it was 1,000,000,000 times stronger than him, and it easily froze the fluctuation. With the fluctuation frozen, the spatial black holes naturally stopped appearing. The spatial black holes that were about to devour Buddha Yin naturally stopped in place, unable to take even a small step forward. How dare you be so reckless? You actually want to destroy this planet in order to break the seal. I originally wanted to keep your spiritual consciousness, but it looks like it's impossible now. Buddha Yin Kong's face was gloomy. Although he did not show any anger, anyone who saw him would definitely know how furious he was at this moment. In that instant, 5 figures with 3 heads and 6 arms flew out from the back of his head. Their faces were filled with endless rage and violence as they walked out from the halo behind his head. The 5 figures were 30 meters tall, and each of them was completely different from the others. The expressions on their faces were also greatly different from the others. After they appeared, each of them roared at the sky, and a shocking aura suddenly erupted from their bodies. It directly distorted the space and caused the great Tao to respond, forming countless phenomena. However, each of them seemed to have the power of an innate grand Luo. The 5 wisdom monarchs formed from the Buddha's anger. At that instant, some ancient books that Luo Fan had seen before he transmigrated flashed through his mind, and he understood what the 5 figures were. After the 5 wisdom monarchs appeared, Buddha Yin Kong's expression returned to calmness. He put his palms together and chanted the name of Buddha again. Meanwhile, the 5 wisdom monarchs trembled and directly passed through the layers of spatial black holes to arrive at the center of the planet where the 5 mountains were. It's just a planet. It's something that can be easily created by people at our level. Aren't you asking me to sacrifice myself for this planet? Aren't you asking me to sacrifice myself for an ant? The voice from the center of the 5 mountains rang out again. The voice was filled with mockery and disdain. All of a sudden, the 5 mountains were lifted up, revealing a tiny gap between them. The gap was so tiny that it was unimaginable. It was so tiny that even the legendary atoms and quarks could not pass through it. However, for people whose power had reached the level of an innate grand Luo, this gap was more than enough. In an instant, a beam of light shot out from the gap, directly breaking free from the seal of the 5 mountains, and escaped. After the ray of light broke free from the seal of the 5 mountains, it did not stop at all. It directly shattered the void and charged into it. It wanted to escape from this void and head to the infinite void of the universe that it could reach. A thought flashed through Luo Fan's mind, and he instantly understood what was going on. At this moment, the power still existed within the 5 mountains, and it had condensed into an existence that was similar to an innate grand Luo. However, it had completely lost its spirituality, or rather, it had temporarily lost its spirituality. The essence of the power was still at the level of an innate grand Luo. As the grand Tao circulated, it would naturally condense its spirituality again. The spirituality of the power was the spiritual consciousness of the existence that was similar to an innate grand Luo. At this moment, it had transformed into the golden ray of light and escaped the seal of the 5 mountains. The 5 wisdom monarchs were formed from the wrath of the Buddha, and they possessed most of the Buddha's strength. Moreover, their consciousness was only filled with battle instincts, and their reaction speed was so swift that it even surpassed the Buddha himself. At the instant that the golden ray was about to enter the shattered space, each of them casually condensed a strange artifact, and they blasted it towards the golden ray and wiped it away. However, right at this moment, the 5 mountains shook violently again. Another golden ray charged out from the tiny gap that had been created, and it shattered space with the intention of entering. Chapter 653, Spirituality. Chapter 614. The change of the sky overflow for the initial spiritual consciousness. Although the spiritual consciousness that was condensed later was not his own, to a certain extent, it could also be regarded as his own. That was because spiritual awareness was born from that power. That spiritual awareness was still a manifestation of that power, and it was very different from a living being that was truly born from the world. Because of this, even though the spiritual consciousness had decided to leave on its own, it was still affected by that power. It could still make such a seemingly inconceivable, but in reality, it was an extremely natural and logical choice. Perhaps, in its subconsciousness, it was still just a power. It was still a spiritual consciousness that came from that power and not a complete self. Although it had made the decision to abandon its own body and the power that came from its source, it still did not think that it was complete above its source. Because of this, the moment the spiritual consciousness flew out, it naturally used all means to attract and test the 5 wisdom kings. The moment the new spiritual consciousness was born, it naturally obtained the memories and thoughts left behind by the previous spiritual consciousness. Because it was a spiritual consciousness formed from the same power, its thoughts and thoughts were almost exactly the same. Even its understanding of itself was almost exactly the same. As a result, every spiritual consciousness made the same choice. He directly left his memories and thoughts behind, and he relied on the unique energy that belonged to the Khanate grand heavenly realm to draw upon the grand Tao and speed up the time it took for his body to condense a spiritual sense. His escape was both to attract the 5 Wisdom Kings and test the Supreme Wisdom King, and at the same time, he was hoping to get lucky and see if he could escape. Just like that, it was unknown how many spiritual consciousnesses were produced, escaped, and were destroyed by the 5 Wisdom Kings. In the end, it finally found the 5 Wisdom Kings' weaknesses that were not their weaknesses, and dozens of spiritual consciousnesses were finally able to escape. As for why there were so many spiritual consciousnesses in the last wave, naturally, it was because the power had been continuously gathering before. It did not directly send out all of its spiritual sense. Instead, it used its own power to hide the spiritual sense in the 5 mountains, waiting for the 5 wisdom monarchs to reveal a flaw so that it could escape. Luo Fan faintly smiled, a faint expression appearing on his face. His heart was filled with satisfaction. The previous process had happened at an unimaginable speed, yet he was able to see all the details so clearly. This was definitely difficult for him in the past, and it was impossible for him to do it so easily. However, at this moment, he was able to see everything so easily. This was enough to prove that Luo Fan had made great progress compared to before. It showed that even if his cultivation realm had not improved greatly, it was definitely not too far away from a real improvement. If I can clearly see what is in the depths of my spirit, it might be the moment when I achieve the 5 Chi's unifications. Luo Fan suddenly had an inexplicable expectation in his heart. In the instant that Buddha expansion broke through, he used the aura of Buddha expansion to feel the endless changes that happened in that instant. He saw what Buddha expansion saw. The powerful Buddha sitting in the center of the universe, surrounded by endless galaxies, with senior sister Wuqiang behind his head. In the instant that he saw the Buddha, he vaguely felt as if an indescribable existence had formed in the depths of his spirit through some unbelievable channel. That existence was incomparably profound and possessed a might that shocked even Luo Fan. It possessed a power that even Luo Fan had to be careful when dealing with it. In that instant, Luo Fan knew that the existence would definitely bring him shocking benefits. However, it was precisely because that existence was unfathomable, indescribable, and possessed unimaginable power that Luo Fan did not dare to try to understand and comprehend the existence of that thing the moment he knew it existed. This was because he had no idea what would happen the moment he saw the existence clearly. In the end, did he comprehend the supreme mysteries and instantly improve greatly in his cultivation, directly breaking through the bottleneck he was in, directly comprehending the mysteries of the Zenith Heaven and attaining the supreme Zenith Heaven Tao fruit, or was he completely obliterated by that existence? Even his body and soul completely disappeared from this Earth universe, dying and his soul dispersed. It was precisely because of this uncertainty that he did not dare to comprehend it directly. He did not dare to be careless and touch that existence without making any preparations. It was precisely because of this that even though Luo Fan knew that there was an existence hidden in the depths of his spirit that might be of great benefit to him, and that he might even obtain an unimaginable breakthrough because of that existence, he still did not dare to touch it directly, nor did he dare to comprehend it here. Instead, he waited patiently for this wave of things to pass. He waited until he had a quiet place to cultivate in so that he could think of a way to comprehend it and make all sorts of preparations to touch that existence. Therefore, there was an inexplicable expectation in Luo Fan's heart. As for the Buddha, although he was a Khanate Daoyuo, he had just broken through after all. His insight and knowledge still carried the shadow of when he had yet to break through. When the golden light rushed out from the 5 mountains, he did not really think that every single ray of golden light was a real, complete spiritual consciousness. He only thought that it was merely the spiritual consciousness of that power that separated itself into strands and used various methods to escape. In the end, through various efforts, it grew into its own body and allowed it to escape in another form. Yin Kong had seen this method countless times throughout his hundreds of millions of years of roaming the universe. He also had various ways to deal with it. Therefore, although the 5 wisdom kings that were born from his anger were extremely powerful, they were not very serious. They simply wiped out those spiritual consciousnesses. Moreover, because the method that the spiritual consciousnesses used to escape was not complicated to him, it was easy for him to wipe them out. This made him feel a sense of satisfaction and made him think that this matter was over. The spiritual consciousness of that power was exhausted and could no longer pose any threat to him. It was because of this mentality that his emotions gradually calmed down and the anger in his heart gradually weakened. After all, it was hard for anyone to remain angry at something that couldn't possibly affect or harm them. It was just like how an ordinary person would not be so angry at an ant that he would not be able to sleep for the entire night. At most, he would just crush the ant to death. It was also because of the weakening of his anger that the 5 wisdom kings' power weakened a little as well. That was why the tens of thousands of spiritual consciousnesses exploded with unparalleled power and tore through space in an attempt to escape. The 5 wisdom kings reacted a little slower, and in the end, dozens of spiritual consciousnesses managed to escape. Even though Yin Kong had just broken through, he was a golden immortal realm cultivator after all. Earlier, he hadn't been able to see it clearly, and it was only because of his past experiences and thoughts that he'd had in the past that he'd suddenly noticed that he'd actually been schemed against, and the rage in his heart instantly rose explosively by countless times. While this anger greatly increased the power of the 5 wisdom kings, it also instantly removed the obstacles in his heart. It allowed him to directly see the truth, allowing him to instantly know everything that Luo Fan knew before. It was also this knowledge that made the anger in his heart even stronger, causing the 5 wisdom kings' power to skyrocket again. I didn't expect that I would be tricked at the peak of my power. The Buddha's expression was calm as he spoke. As he spoke, the 5 wisdom kings' power skyrocketed again. It was clear that while Yin Kong did not show it directly, the anger in his heart had skyrocketed to an unimaginable level. As soon as he finished speaking, the 5 wisdom kings whose power had skyrocketed roared at the sky again. Their violent rage filled the sky and earth, causing the entire planet to shake violently. Even a magma layer where Luo Fan was surging madly during the shaking, forming a gigantic whirlpool. It swept up the rocks in the surroundings and stirred up the entire planet, causing the entire surface of the planet to shake violently. Moreover, this shaking far surpassed any stone carvings in the history of the planet. In an instant, countless cracks appeared on the ground. Endless flames and magma surged out, drowning an unknown amount of land and killing countless living beings on the surface of the planet. It was as if the end of the world had arrived on the surface of the planet. A wave of resentment and panic rose from the surface of the planet, causing the entire planet to be enveloped in an indescribable atmosphere. The various changes on the planet over the past few days made even the most ordinary of mortals feel that the planet was undergoing some sort of earth-shattering change. This change might completely change their lives, and it might even decide whether they lived or died. Cultivators knew a bit more, so they naturally linked these changes to the various plans of the 8 ancestors over the years. Some even guessed that these changes were caused by the 8 ancestors. Although some didn't think this way, their hearts were filled with indescribably complicated emotions towards the 8 ancestors. It seemed to be resentment, but it also seemed to be reverence. The resentment was because these changes were related to them. The reverence was because they could actually be related to these changes. Luo Fan, who caused such a huge change to the 5 wisdom monarchs, didn't care at all. He just quietly watched as the 5 wisdom monarchs angrily unleashed their power. He didn't care if the planet would be destroyed or if the countless living beings on the planet would die because of the impact of this power. He didn't care at all. even though this planet was originally his body. Even though it was only a few moments ago. Luo Fan's body had the immaculate technique. Naturally, an area of nothingness with a circumference of 3 feet formed around him, isolating him from all the changes in the outside world and all the effects of the magma. He looked at the changes in Buddha Yin Kong's expression and the 5 wisdom monarchs wantonly unleashing their power. An indescribable sadness unknowingly welled up in his heart. Could it be that becoming a Buddha means changing one's mentality to this? This thought suddenly flashed through his mind. The moment this thought appeared, it was like maggots in one's tarsal bones. It was unshakable and impossible to get rid of, causing his impression of the Buddha to instantly worsen. If the existence condensed from seeing the Buddha wants me to become a Buddha like this, even if it's just a clone, I definitely won't do it. Then, another thought appeared in his mind. What Luo Fan disliked was not the Buddha's coldness. It wasn't the Buddha's disregard for the many living beings, but the Buddha's disdain for his previous body. Although the Buddha's eyes seemed benevolent, they contained an indescribable madness. It was as if he wanted to completely destroy all power and matter that went against him. This was what Luo Fan could not bear to see. Luo Fan was able to cultivate to his current realm. His mentality had changed greatly compared to when he was a mortal. This was something he absolutely admitted. He even felt a little emotional when he saw his previous self on Earth. Although his mentality towards mortals and other living beings that were weaker than him did not reach the state where he looked at ants, he did not think highly of them either. If destroying billions of living beings could help him achieve enlightenment, he would definitely do it. However, that did not include treating his body, which had brought him endless benefits, as trash. It also did not include destroying billions of living beings to vent his anger. At that moment, his consciousness had surpassed his values and the bottom line of his heart. Therefore, Luo Fan disliked the Buddha. He even disliked the method of cultivating to become a Buddha. Moreover, there was a detail that made Luo Fan frown even more. Yin Kong's change was too fast. Although Luo Fan did not have a deep understanding of Yin Kong, he was confident that he had a rough understanding of Yin Kong's character through their exchanges over the past few years. He had exchanged various facts with Yin Kong, seen various sights of the universe, and analyzed the various strange things that Yin Kong had seen. That kind of understanding was not based on how Yin Kong described himself, but from his words and his past experiences. It was much more accurate than what Yin Kong said about himself. It was precisely because of this that Luo Fan was certain that Yin Kong cherished his own body. He even had the mentality of a father looking at his children towards the many life forms that lived on his body. Even if this mentality was extremely faint, it still existed. It made it so that he would not easily move his body, and he would not use the lives of those life forms to vent his anger. Luo Fan had even analyzed that the reason why Yin Kong could not escape should be because if he were to leave, the planet would collapse under its own gravitational force. Who knew how many billions of living beings would be directly destroyed in the process of the planet's collapse? It was easy to imagine the huge difference between that mentality and his current mentality. The entire process only took a few moments. In just a few moments, it was possible to completely change the mentality and character of a creature that had been cultivated for hundreds of millions of years. This kind of cultivation method was terrifying. So how could Luo Fan, who had clearly seen all of this, not feel fear? Luo Fan's mind spun, but his expression did not change at all. He even regretted telling Buddha Yin Kong so much about himself in the past. He even regretted helping Buddha Yin Kong to break through to the Tao realm. Although he knew that even if he did not use the Tao realm, Yin Kong would still be able to break through due to the tide of time. It was not him. After all, this was enough to make Luo Fan feel a little better. This was because Luo Fan had a vague feeling that this kind of change was simply harming Yin Kong. While countless thoughts ran through Luo Fan's mind, Yin Kong did not feel anything at all. Instead, he was still wantonly releasing his rage. He stood silently before the golden bridge with an indifferent expression on his face, Yet the rage in his heart hadn't reduced in the slightest. He waited until the 5 enlightened kings had vented their rage for a long time and finally caused a layer of lava to be on the verge of collapse before he issued a command in his heart. He made the 5 enlightened kings suddenly pounce towards the 5 mountains at the center of the planet that were arranged in 3 dimensions, and they were suppressing the energy of a golden immortal realm cultivator at the center. The 5 wisdom kings' power had also stepped into the innate grand Luo realm. In the blink of an eye, it traversed a great distance and directly entered the 5 mountains. The 5 mountains were formed from Empyrean's power, and the 5 wisdom kings were formed from his anger. Both of them had the same origin, and they fused together in an instant. It was as if the 2 of them had fused together the moment they appeared. At the instant the 5 wisdom kings fused with the 5 mountains, a shrill cry that shook the heavens and the earth suddenly resounded from the center of the 5 mountains. After that, peerlessly powerful energy erupted ceaselessly from the center of the 5 mountains, and it ceaselessly charged at the 5 mountains in an attempt to pry them apart. However, the power of the 5 mountains was countless times stronger than before. The eruption of energy was so powerful that it could even charge through tens of thousands of tiny cracks before. But at this moment, it could not move the 5 mountains at all. It could only be sealed by the 5 mountains, and it was ceaselessly suppressed and attacked. In the end, it shrunk into a ball, and it was countless times smaller than before. It was practically like a speck of dust. Ha ha! Ha! I've already escaped. So what's the point of sealing me? Do you think you can stay here for eternity? Do you think you can be angry for eternity? As long as you leave, as long as you don't get angry, I'll be able to escape. Ha! Mad laughter resounded ceaselessly from the speck of dust. The laughter was so loud, and it was filled with joy. It was as if it had already obtained a great benefit. I see. Luo Fan listened from afar, and he understood what was going on. After the last tens of thousands of strands of consciousness left, the power had already formed a new consciousness, and it possessed spirituality once more. This consciousness, this spirituality, was not much different from the previous consciousnesses and spirituality. Its heart and thoughts were all the same. Therefore, he instantly understood the plan of the past consciousnesses. He knew that the departure of those consciousnesses did not mean that they had completely abandoned him. Instead, they hid themselves. They might be on this planet, or they might be in the void of the universe. They were accumulating their power, waiting for Yin Kong to leave, or waiting for the anger in Yin Kong's heart to disappear and the power of the 5 wisdom kings to disappear. Then, they would think of a way to save him and give him true freedom. There was a prerequisite for this method, and that was that the power had not been erased by the Buddha. Because of this prerequisite, when the 5 wisdom kings were venting their anger, the power had already made countless preparations. It had directly constructed countless formation runes around itself, and those runes intertwined to form a huge formation. It was connected to the huge planet, and it resonated with it. It borrowed the power of the planet to help it bear the pressure from the 5 mountains outside. Normally speaking, the reason the 5 mountains were formed was to suppress the power, making it the source of cultivation for the entire planet. It was to make it the transit point for all the cultivators on the planet to fuse with the planet. The power it borrowed would definitely be the power of the planet. Therefore, if it resisted like this, it would definitely be able to resist the power. At the very least, it would be able to maintain its existence. Just now, the development of the situation was just as he had expected. Although the power of the 5 wisdom kings combined with the 5 mountains was unimaginably powerful, and it directly compressed him to the size of a speck of dust, it was unable to harm his consciousness at all. It was unable to truly harm the source of the power, the huge formation that the 8 ancestors of cultivation had created by combining the bloodlines of many cultivators and many magic treasures. Because of this, the spiritual consciousness that was formed from power said so. However, it was clear that the power was still looking at Buddha, Yin Kong with the same old eyes. It was not as clear as Luo Fan. After Yin Kong became a Buddha, his mind had changed greatly. Compared to before, his consciousness seemed to have become a completely different person. He used the power of the planet to resist Yin Kong's 5 mountains and the 5 wisdom kings to protect himself. If it was Yin Kong's previous state of mind, he might have directly added a few seals and then helplessly stepped onto the bridge of light and left. This was because if one wanted to destroy that defensive power and obliterate that power, one would have to destroy the entire planet's power, which would cause the planet to undergo tremendous changes. The planet would become extremely damaged, and it might even directly collapse into nothingness. This was something that the previous Yin Kong could not accept. No matter how angry he was, he could only suppress his anger and let go of the power. However, it was clear that, just as Luo Fan had analyzed, the current Yin Kong was different from before. Without any hesitation, Yin Kong's body trembled and another powerful force was released from his body. It covered the sky and the earth as it poured into the 5 mountains in the sky. This power was not the power of a Buddha. It was the power of a planet. Although Yin Kong had become a Buddha, his original body was still the planet. He still possessed the essence of the planet, and he still had the ability to control the planet. Naturally, he could still release the power of the planet. This power was unimaginably powerful. Even the current Luo Fan was like an ant in front of this power. Even if he could use all sorts of methods to escape from the damage of this power, it was almost impossible for him to resist and defeat this power. Such a powerful force was poured into the 5 mountains. In an instant, the 5 mountains trembled slightly, and endless strange scenes appeared on them. In an instant, the 5 mountains seemed to have turned into 5 worlds. In these worlds, a planet was born from nothingness and grew. Countless living beings lived on the growing planet, seeking the Tao, killing, and enjoying themselves. Countless voices came from the 5 worlds, and an ancient aura spread out from the 5 worlds, filling the hole in the center of the planet. Then the 5 worlds and the 5 mountains suddenly collapsed. The originally complete planet and living beings suddenly exploded, giving birth to an earth-shattering power, turning the 5 worlds into a gray state similar to the chaotic soul. At this moment, the entire planet suddenly came to a halt. The entire planet that was originally affected by the earthquake, which made it feel like the end of the world, cracked, and the magma instantly stopped as if time had stopped. However, this stop did not mean that the planet had returned to its original state. Instead, it revealed an indescribable pressure and despair. It was as if an extremely huge change was happening, as if the end of the world was really coming. At this moment, every living being on this planet, regardless of whether they were strong or weak, whether they had spiritual sense or not, whether they were cultivators or mortals, instantly burst into tears. They felt their hearts ache so much that they couldn't breathe. At this moment, an earth-shattering howl came from the center of the 5 mountains. The howl even spread out of the hole and reached the surface of the planet. It swept through the entire planet's atmosphere, so the entire planet could hear it. "You're actually going to destroy the entire planet just to kill me? You're so ruthless." An incredulous voice came from the center, and, similarly, it spread to every inch of the planet's surface. Yin Kong was expressionless, not affected by the changes in the outside world at all. He stood there, and with a wave of his hand, the 5 mountains suddenly collapsed. At this moment, Luo Fan's mind flashed with an indescribable sense of danger. He made a prompt decision and drilled into the void. The space-time traversal technique that he had comprehended from the space-time god was instantly unleashed. His figure drilled into the void and disappeared without a trace. The moment he disappeared, an indescribable shockwave was produced at the center of the 5 mountains. The shockwave was incomparably huge, so strong that it was unimaginably strong. At the moment it was created, it even received the blessing of the great Tao. Naturally, it had a spiritual sense that was neither too strong nor too weak. As it spread out, it let out joyful cries, constantly stirring all the matter, primordial chi, power, and even the void around it into extremely fine dust. Then, It wrapped up these fine dust particles and condensed them into the shape of strange beasts in the void, spreading out in all directions. In the blink of an eye, it swept past the Buddha and the layer of lava. The Buddha's cultivation had long since reached the level of connate grand luo. The 3 flowers at one's prominence and the 5 chis in spirit naturally possessed the immaculate and leakless technique. It was many times stronger than Luo Fan's technique, although the fluctuations were strong enough to give birth to spiritual sense. The instant they swept past the area he was in, they naturally separated and circled around him in a spherical shape. They were unable to affect him in the slightest, nor did they hurt him in the slightest. The bridge of light before him seemed to not exist at all. When the shock wave swept past the bridge of light, it was as if it was sweeping through the air. It could not discover the bridge of light at all, nor could it affect it at all. The Buddha and the bridge of light could not be harmed by the shock wave, but that did not mean that the shock wave was not powerful. The fact that the shock wave could form a spiritual sense meant that it had reached an earth-shattering level. When the shock wave swept past the layer of magma, it displayed its power even more vividly. Chapter 615. Destruction and rebirth. The entire planet seemed to have turned into a ball made of plasticine in an instant, constantly twisting and changing shape in the void. The scale of this distortion and transformation was so large that it was like a speck of dust to the entire Earth universe. However, for all the living beings living on this planet, it was unimaginably huge. Almost every time the planet twisted and changed shape, a huge number of living beings turned into powder, directly twisted into pieces, and disappeared without a trace. At this time, the planet was millions of times larger than Earth, and its atmosphere was also countless times thicker than Earth's. However, such a thick atmosphere was easily torn into pieces like an eggshell under this distortion. As the planet twisted, the atmosphere on the surface of the planet kept pouring into the cracks that suddenly appeared on the surface of the planet, and it also kept dissipating in all directions, directly escaping the gravitational pull of the planet. Although this planet was in the final moments of the cultivation era, and the most glorious moments of the entire cultivation era, there were countless cultivators on a planet, no matter what era it was. After all, there were more mortals who did not cultivate on a planet. As long as mortals did not cultivate, the atmosphere was an absolutely indispensable condition for survival. For many living beings, this change in the atmosphere was even more terrifying than the previous change in the strata, and it made the mortals feel even more despair. After all, although the change in the strata affected a huge area, it only affected a portion of the living beings affected by the change in the strata. The change in the atmosphere affected the ecological environment of the entire planet, and it was enough to wipe out all life on the planet. How could people not feel despair? At this moment, Luo Fan was already hundreds of millions of kilometers away from this planet. Since space-time travel had the word space-time in it, it naturally could not only travel through time, but also travel through space. Moreover, because the power of this kind of space-time travel was carried out on the scale of space-time, it was much more mysterious than the power of ordinary cultivators tearing and traveling through space. If one did not have the same space-time attribute power, it could not be destroyed. If Luo Fan had chosen to tear open space and travel through space to escape from the layer of magma, the chances of success would have been extremely small. Even if he had succeeded, it was very likely that he would have been affected by the various disturbances and would not have been able to reach the place he wanted to go. The reason why Luo Fan wanted to leave was to avoid the disturbances that had developed spiritual awareness. If he could not control where he landed and ended up entering the center of the disturbances, wouldn't it be too much of a coincidence? It was because of this that he expended a great deal of effort and directly used the space-time travel technique to travel through space to arrive hundreds of millions of kilometers away from his planet. Standing here and looking up, one could see that the planet, which was millions of times larger than Earth, looked like a circular wall from such a distance. At this moment, the circular wall was spitting out endless air currents, forming a strange mist belt. It was as if the circular wall had become a living creature that was struggling on its deathbed. The air currents that the planet spewed out were so strong that even though Luo Fan was hundreds of millions of kilometers away from the planet, he could faintly feel the air currents blowing towards him, causing his clothes to flutter continuously. As the air currents blew towards him, there were faint roars, cries, curses, and screams that entered Luo Fan's ears. It was the voice of the planet at this moment. It was carried by the airflow and directly passed through a distance of hundreds of millions of kilometers and was heard by Luo Fan. Listening to the sounds that could only appear in countless apocalypses, Luo Fan could not help but sigh helplessly. This planet is really finished. It's a pity that it's a rare habitat in the vast universe. He did not have much affection for the many living beings on the planet, but as a living being, he was still a living being. The moral bottom line in Luo Fan's heart made it impossible for him to remain indifferent to the tragedy of billions of lives being wiped out. The speed at which the planet changed was extremely fast. Just as Luo Fan sighed, the ripples that were produced from the center of the planet, which were so powerful that they were endowed with spiritual consciousness by the great Tao, had already carried a huge amount of power and matter that had been turned into powder and directly rushed out of the layers of barriers, directly rushing out of the surface of the planet. Even after passing through such a thick layer and shredding so much matter and power into pieces, the strength of the ripples still did not weaken too much. It was still unstoppable. Countless strange beasts made of countless particles of powder let out cries of joy, wreaking havoc and growing crazily. Ravaged by the ripples, the planet was like a strange giant egg that was incubating countless strange beasts. It was directly torn into countless pieces by the countless strange beasts and exploded in all directions. There was no air in the void of the universe, and the various energies were extremely subtle and could not transmit ordinary ripples. As a result, although the entire planet exploded into countless pieces, it was like a pantomime. There was no sound at all. Only Luo Fan, who was hundreds of millions of kilometers away, could hear the earth-shattering sound with the help of the remaining atmosphere that was gushing out at the same time. The sound was so loud that even with Luo Fan's ears, his eardrums felt slightly numb from the vibrations, almost producing sharp pain. The joyful cries of the ripples, which had already developed consciousness, became even more intense. They frantically shredded the matter of the planet that had exploded into extremely fine fragments, and then directly devoured them before turning them into countless strange beasts, making them even stronger and more terrifying. The entire planet was so huge, but in the end, no matter could escape. Even the countless cultivators and living beings on it were directly shredded and devoured, becoming a part of the powerful ripples that completely replaced the existence of the planet. At this moment, the ripples looked like a sphere that was constantly expanding outwards. Countless strange beasts flew wildly on it, like waves after waves, rapidly expanding outwards with the ripples. Luo Fan waited for a moment. With a thought, he directly tore apart the void and continued to retreat. In just an instant, he had retreated another 900 million kilometers, directly arriving at the planet, which was 1 billion kilometers away from the ripples formed by countless strange beasts. Standing there, he looked up and saw that the huge, rippling sphere, which had already become the size of a fist, was rapidly expanding. In a short while, it had already engulfed the place where he was originally. If Luo Fan had not left before, he would have probably been completely engulfed by the ripples. The ripples destroyed the entire planet, the void where the planet was located, and all the matter and power within it. It was impossible for power to not be damaged at all. Although the damage was not much, it gave Luo Fan the confidence to deal with it. Even if he had been engulfed by the ripples just now, he was confident that he could resist the ripples without suffering much damage. But that would still be troublesome. Thus, seeing that the ripples had already engulfed his original position, Luo Fan could not help but heave a sigh of relief. However, Luo Fan also knew that the ripples could no longer spread to where he was at this moment. This was because in another direction, hundreds of millions of kilometers away from the ripples, was the center of the parent star system, where a star that was millions of times larger than the planet was located. Although the ripples were earth-shattering and had even broken through the limits, obtaining the support of the great Tao and giving birth to spiritual sense, compared to the star that was millions of times larger than the planet, it was still far too weak. The light and heat that the star released every second was probably many times stronger than the power contained in the ripples. On the other hand, this star had been continuously releasing this intense light and heat to the entire universe since an unknown number of millions of years ago, and it would continue to do so for an unknown number of millions of years. Under such circumstances, how could the ripples' power compare to it? Thus, Luo Fan was almost certain that the moment the ripples shook the star and triggered the star's power to counterattack, it would be the moment the ripples disappeared. Sure enough, the moment the ripples that were like strange beasts charged into the star with countless strange beasts, the huge star that had not changed since ancient times suddenly trembled slightly. From the direction that the countless strange beasts had charged into, it suddenly sprayed out a fiery red belt of light. Compared to the entire star, this fiery red belt of light was so small that it was almost negligible. However, when the belt of light rushed into the ripples that carried the countless strange beasts, the spiritual sense that was condensed from the ripples suddenly let out an earth-shattering howl. Although this howl did not spread out and was heard by Luo Fan, the thoughts and the ripples contained within it were received by Luo Fan without any obstruction, allowing Luo Fan to clearly understand the fear contained within the howl. Along with this miserable howl, the beasts formed from dust that were swept up by the ripples collapsed into countless dust particles like a landslide, directly merging into the fiery red belt of light and disappearing without a trace. Luo Fan looked into the distance and saw that the fiery red belt of light continued to spread along the countless strange beasts. In just a few breaths' time, it had already spread to every inch of the ripples, causing the huge strange beasts to become fiery red. Then, they suddenly collapsed and turned into countless fine dust, continuously disappearing from the outside. After another few breaths' time, they had completely disappeared without a trace. From afar, it looked as if the sun had spat out a breath of air and burned it clean. After the belt of light completely dispersed the ripples, it did not shrink back. Instead, it flew outwards, its speed becoming slower and slower. In the end, it stopped somewhere more than 300 million miles in front of Luo Fan. It constantly twisted and shrank, gradually condensing into a fiery red, strange existence. It slowly rotated, slowly absorbing the surrounding stardust and energy, as if it was brewing something. Looking at this change, Luo Fan suddenly had an epiphany. This was the embryonic form of a star. Understanding this, Luo Fan's eyes suddenly revealed a hint of shock. He looked up at the sky and vaguely seemed to see a huge hand that covered the sky and Earth casually moving about in the entire Earth's universe, controlling all the rules of the Earth's universe. As he was shocked, the complicated emotions he had because of the billions of lives that had died gradually faded. His state of mind unknowingly rose to an extremely grand perspective. The matter of the planet dying along with the countless lives on it gradually became smaller in his eyes. Although this did not make him directly indifferent to everything that had happened on the planet, it had already freed him from the influence of this matter on his state of mind. Destruction and rebirth have always appeared together. This thought took root in Luo Fan's mind and vaguely touched the bottleneck that prevented him from achieving the 5-cheese unification. At this moment, he was filled with infinite confidence that he could achieve the 5-cheese unification. The evolution of a planet from nothing to something required an extremely long period of time. As a result, although the embryonic form of the planet had already begun to absorb stardust and energy to build a planet, it was extremely slow. If it wasn't for Luo Fan's shocking eyesight, he would not have noticed any changes. After watching for a while, Luo Fan knew that unless he traveled through time, the planet might not be able to evolve to the point where it could give birth to life, even if he transformed into a planet. At this moment, an indifferent and calm voice passed through space and entered Luo Fan's ears. I've committed an immeasurable amount of killing today. I made a fool of myself in front of fellow cultivator. With a thought, Luo Fan looked up and saw a Buddha standing on the golden bridge, appearing out of thin air several feet in front of him. It was Buddha Yin Kong, as well as the golden bridge that had appeared in front of him earlier. Looking at their current postures, it was as if Yin Kong had casually stepped onto the golden bridge and naturally arrived at this place 1 billion miles away from where he was. Although Luo Fan had already escaped from the emotions of the destruction of the planet and the death of an unknown number of billions of living beings, it did not change his view of this Yin Kong. At Luo Fan's level, there was no reason for him to hide his thoughts. Therefore, after hearing Yin Kong's words, he calmly said, "I regret not leaving a few years ago and exploring the interior of the planet." Yin Kong already had extremely rich experience before he became a Buddha, and after becoming a Buddha, his intelligence had increased by who knows how many times. He instantly grasped Luo Fan's mentality when he heard Luo Fan's words and sighed. I originally thought that I'd finally found a companion in the vast universe, but I didn't expect our ideals to be so different. Forget it, since we walk different paths, we can't make plans together. I'll be leaving now. With that, he indifferently smiled and took a big step on the golden bridge. His figure disappeared without a trace along with the golden bridge. There were no traces of the entire process at all. It was as if sky deflection and the golden bridge had never appeared in this universe. With a thought, Luo Fan used the traces of karma left between him and Yin Kong to sense him. But he found that he could not sense any aura from Yin Kong at all. It was as if Yin Kong had never existed in this universe. After Yin Kong became a Buddha, he was equivalent to becoming a Khanate Grand Luo with the cultivation method of a gold core. His realm was even stronger than Luo Fan's main body, and it was much stronger than his clone on Earth. According to his cultivation realm, Luo Fan could sense Yin Kong through karma. Although he could not sense the situation around him like other living beings, he could still roughly sense where Yin Kong was. At this time, the emergence of such a situation either meant that Yin Kong's realm had suddenly improved greatly, directly reaching a level that Luo Fan could not sense with karma, or Yin Kong had directly left the entire Earth. After all, if the realm had exceeded the limit of karma, then Luo Fan naturally would not be able to sense any information about Yin Kong through karma. Moreover, the ability to sense all things that had karma with oneself after cultivating the Khanate Leakless Gold Core was only a kind of rule of the Earth. If Yin Kong had surpassed the Earth and left the Earth, then naturally it would be impossible to sense his existence, as expected. That Buddha is really not in the Earth. Luo Fan sighed. Yin Kong had just broken through and become a Buddha, and his cultivation realm had not even stabilized yet. Obviously, it was impossible for him to achieve an unimaginable breakthrough in such a short period of time, and it was impossible for him to directly raise his cultivation realm beyond the limit of karma. Since that was the case, the karma could not sense Yin Kong, then the only possibility was that Yin Kong had left the Earth. This conclusion, coupled with the feeling he had when Yin Kong broke through and saw the incredible Buddha with Yin Kong's special sense, did not need to guess anymore. He could directly conclude that Yin Kong was going to where the Buddha was, and he also knew that the incredible Buddha was not in the Earth, but in another universe. With these various conclusions, Luo Fan suddenly had a strange feeling that the body he sent to the Earth might be of greater use, and it was not just for his body to understand the mystery of Daoyuo. With this feeling, Luo Fan instantly made some changes in his previous thoughts. Originally, he did not care. Even if he had to abandon this body, he wanted to see the power of the Khanate Daoyuo in order to understand the mystery of Daoyuo, but he directly abandoned his plan. With a slight thought, he recalled the many places he had passed through when he traveled through the void of the universe. Finally, he locked onto a lonely, stable planet and directly tore the void open, crossing hundreds of thousands of light years to reach that planet. Chapter 616. Replace? At this moment, Luo Fan was on the verge of leaving. Although this wasn't Luo Fan's weakest moment, compared to other times, it was the moment when he was the most relaxed. First, the golden light didn't contain any power, but its characteristics were almost compatible with the Great Tao. All power and all defenses were useless against it. Even the immaculate and leakless barrier in Luo Fan's body, which allowed him to be unaffected by anything outside, was useless against the golden light. In an instant, the golden light had already passed through the immaculate and leakless barrier and directly charged into the Naiwan Palace between Luo Fan's eyebrows. It instantly grasped the source of Luo Fan's cultivation and directly entered his sea of consciousness through a mysterious location in the Naiwan Palace. Luo Fan had already reacted the moment the golden light approached him. He knew that something was about to invade his body. However, even though his reaction speed was extremely fast, the golden light was even faster than his reaction speed. Moreover, the golden light contained an aura that had been strengthened by the laws of the world, directly collapsing all of his defenses. Before he could even begin to block it, it had already burrowed into his body, then burrowed into his sea of consciousness. This is that existence's spiritual sense. In that instant, Luo Fan had already reacted, and this thought flashed across his mind. His sea of consciousness was currently filled with the huge, auspicious cloud, and the three flowers of the unification of the heavens, the earth, and the man had stabilized the entire sea of consciousness. It could be said that the stability of this sea of consciousness wasn't too far off from his body in the great desolate world. However, such a sea of consciousness was like a sieve under the spiritual sense. It couldn't resist the spiritual sense at all. After a few flashes, the spiritual sense didn't touch any auspicious cloud, nor did it trigger the three flowers of the unification of the heavens, the earth, and the man. It directly appeared in front of his spirit, and easily broke through the immaculate and leakless barrier that was countless times stronger than the outside of his body, and entered his spirit. At this moment, Luo Fan finally sensed the various fluctuations in the spiritual sense. He was sure that the golden light was indeed the spiritual sense of existence that was similar to the Khanate Grand Heavenly Realm, which was destroyed along with the entire planet by Yin Kong. This body is actually so wonderful. It seems that it's only one step away from breaking through the shackles and becoming as powerful as my original body. If I occupy this body, perhaps I can truly break through the shackles of the origin and become a true cultivator, possessing a realm that is compatible with power. An indescribable joy seeped out from the spiritual sense. The way the spiritual sense seeped out was extremely mysterious. It wasn't like the spiritual sense of an ordinary living being that constantly emanated a thought. Instead, it relied on the characteristics of being compatible with the Tao and was seeped out through a method that couldn't be described with words. If it was in the outside world, with Luo Fan's cultivation, he wouldn't be able to sense the release of a thought in such a way. After all, if he could sense the thought, how could the spiritual sense invade his body when he couldn't sense it? However, the situation at this moment was different. At this moment, the spiritual sense had already entered the depths of Luo Fan's spirit. Under such circumstances, any changes in the depths of the spirit would be within his perception. No matter what method the spiritual sense used to seep out, it would definitely seep out. Under the circumstances that everything was confined to the depths of his spirit, it was naturally easy for him to sense it. Is this one of the spiritual senses that escaped before, or the one that escaped from the destruction of the planet? Under such a dangerous situation, Luo Fan actually didn't panic, and even had the mind to think that way. There was even a faint smile on his face. It's just a strand of consciousness without any strength. Even if it's a strand of consciousness that's similar to the innate golden immortal realm, it's just a strand of consciousness. If such a strand of consciousness can take over my body, then I might as well just kill myself. Luo Fan muttered. With a slight thought, countless unbelievable changes suddenly occurred in the depths of his spirit. Billions of worlds appeared out of thin air, and in an instant, they filled his entire spirit, directly wrapping the spiritual sense into one of those worlds. These worlds weren't real worlds, but merely a transformation of the spirit. Its essence was still the spirit, and it was still the source of Luo Fan's spiritual sense. However, the transformation of these worlds had caused his spirit to become so complicated that it surpassed the imagination of all living beings. Compared to the magnificent earth, or even a complete world, it was far inferior. However, it also made his spirit hundreds of millions of times more complicated than before. Perhaps it was unimaginable for other living beings to use the spirit to create worlds. Even if some cultivators with higher cultivation could barely do it, the worlds they created would definitely only be constructed from their memories. No matter how complicated the worlds they created were, they would definitely not be more than 10,000 times more complicated than the spirit. However, it was different for Luo Fan. Luo Fan had long been familiar with the spirit to create worlds. Even if all the cultivators in the entire earth for hundreds of millions of years were combined, they would not be able to compare to him. After all, in the past hundreds of millions of years, Luo Fan had almost always used his spirit to create countless worlds to test the immortal brand in the depths of his spirit. Through the transformation of these worlds, almost all the mysteries of the great Tao contained in the immortal brand were transformed into runes. With such a sparring partner, even if Luo Fan originally knew nothing about the spirit to create worlds, he would definitely be able to surpass all living beings in the earth. Moreover, Luo Fan had originally opened up thousands of mini kiliocosms and medium kiliocosms in the untainted world. His understanding of the essence of the world was beyond imagination. Using the spirit to create worlds was much easier than actually opening up a real world. How could he know nothing about the spirit to create worlds? Under such circumstances, although that strand of spiritual sense had an essence that surpassed that of Luo Fan's divine soul, it could only constantly move and shift in the illusory world created by Luo Fan's divine soul. In the end, it was entangled by the various changes in those worlds. It could only travel from one world to another, but could not break through these worlds and truly come into contact with Luo Fan's divine soul source. It could not enter deep enough into Luo Fan's divine soul to truly erase Luo Fan's divine soul source and replace it. Furthermore, in the process of constantly shuttling through those worlds, this strand of spiritual sense continuously displayed all kinds of inconceivable divine abilities, manifesting a kind of realm that Luo Fan yearned for even in his dreams. It allowed Luo Fan to have an incomparably deep and detailed understanding of that realm, allowing him to possibly comprehend that realm in the end, allowing his own cultivation realm to achieve an unimaginable breakthrough. It could be said that when the spiritual consciousness became entangled in the endless worlds created by the depths of Luo Fan's spirit, it had already become an existence similar to the indestructible brand in the depths of Luo Fan's spirit. The threat it posed to Luo Fan had already been reduced to almost zero. After temporarily dealing with the spiritual consciousness that had suddenly appeared, Luo Fan cast his consciousness into the outside world and carefully observed his surroundings. However, he found that at this moment, he was no longer in the Kiliocosm galaxy. However, at the same time, he was not at the lonely and stable planet that he had locked onto before. Instead, he was in an extremely quiet and empty space that did not have a single star within an unknown number of light years. In fact, even the various kinds of yuan qi and various kinds of free energy in the void of the universe were no different from the most ordinary and common void of the universe that he had passed through in the past. Without stars, there was naturally no planet as a point of reference. Moreover, yuan qi was no different from the most ordinary and common void of the universe, so there was naturally no yuan qi as a point of reference. Without any point of reference, he had no idea where he was in the boundless void of the universe on Earth. In other words, the current Luo Fan was already lost in the infinite void of the universe on Earth. When he realized this, he could not help but smile bitterly. I didn't think that I would actually get lost in a moment of carelessness. Previously, the moment he was traveling through the void, he was invaded by that spiritual consciousness, and he was even almost replaced by that spiritual consciousness and taken over his body. Under such circumstances, no matter how determined he was and how perfect his Taoist heart was, he could only focus all his attention on his body and the depths of his spirit. As a result, he could not care about the changes in the outside world at all. He could only allow himself to be sent to random places out of habit. He could not lock onto his destination at all. In the end, he traveled for who knew how many light years and appeared in this space. If he had returned to his senses as soon as he appeared in this void, he could have directly grabbed the ripples caused by traveling through the void, and naturally he could have followed the flow and returned to the Kiliacosm galaxy against the spatial ripples. However, he had focused all his attention on the depths of his spirit just now. Although it was not a very long time, it had been at least a few days. The ripples in this void had already calmed down, so how could there be any traces left? How could he still rely on the remnants of the spatial ripples to return to the Kiliacosm galaxy? After smiling bitterly, Luo Fan did not panic much. To him, there was no essential difference between any place and any space in this universe on Earth. In fact, there was not much difference between this place and his original target. Moreover, he had countless methods. If he insisted on identifying his current location and returning to the Kiliacosm galaxy, it was not impossible, but it would take more effort. Since he was already here, he would take things as they came. Luo Fan quickly adjusted his state of mind. His eyes focused, and he looked up, down, left, and right in all directions. In this cosmic void, there was no gravity, so there was naturally no real up or down, real left or right, and real front or back. However, Luo Fan needed a direction, so he used his current position to determine up or down, left or right, front or back. After the divine light in his eyes focused, Luo Fan's eyesight was tens of thousands of times more powerful than before. He finally caught a trace of the light emitted by the stars that were extremely far away in the void that he could not see before. With a slight thought, he locked on to the front right, and the light in his eyes focused again. He faintly saw the existence of spiral-shaped light spot tens of thousands of light years away. This spiral shape was extremely familiar to Luo Fan. After thinking for a while, he suddenly realized that it was the so-called Milky Way. So, I've already left the Milky Way without realizing it. Luo Fan smiled slightly and shook his head. He turned his head and looked diagonally upward. There was also a source of light there. He kept improving his eyesight and finally saw the existence of a cone-shaped light spot. Although the light from the light spot was much weaker than the light from the Milky Way, the size of the light spot was much larger than the Milky Way. Obviously, it was a galaxy that was further away from here than the Milky Way, but on a much larger scale. The moment he saw this galaxy, Luo Fan faintly felt that there seemed to be something in this galaxy that was related to him. At Luo Fan's current realm, this kind of indescribable feeling was the most credible. Therefore, although he had long decided to go into seclusion somewhere, Luo Fan still instantly changed the original location of his seclusion and locked his seclusion location in that river system. Since he had decided, Luo Fan directly tore open the void and entered it with a slight thought. This ability to tear open the void and travel a long distance was naturally not without any distance limit. However, when one reached the realm of Tao Integration Samsara, this limit had reached a huge scale relative to the entire Earth's universe. Obviously, the entire Earth's universe contained hundreds of millions of galaxies. The distance between two galaxies was simply insignificant to the entire Earth's universe. The distance between Luo Fan's current position and that galaxy naturally could not really touch that limit. Otherwise, it would be impossible for Luo Fan to tear open the void and travel randomly from the Milky Way's mother galaxy. Therefore, after tearing open the void, it only took a few breaths before Luo Fan directly passed through the boundless void and arrived outside the cone-shaped galaxy. When he really stood at the edge of this galaxy, Luo Fan truly felt the vastness of this galaxy. From the extremely distant position just now, he saw that this galaxy was a cone-shaped top. But when he arrived here, what he saw was an incomparably huge, overwhelming, and densely packed starry sky. Even with his eyesight, he could not see the entire galaxy, nor could he see that he was in the shape of a cone-shaped top. Compared to the primordial world, the living beings in the Earth's universe can feel their own insignificance even more. They can also feel reverence. Luo Fan could not help but sigh with emotion in his mind. The vastness of the primordial world might not be inferior to the Earth's universe, but in the primordial world, living beings could only look around at the boundless land and endless mountains and rivers. It was not much different from ordinary people observing around on a planet. Therefore, the shock they felt was naturally not much different from the imagination of ordinary people on a planet. However, in the Earth's universe, standing in the void of the universe and looking around, the insignificant brilliance in the distance was an incomparably huge star that could contain billions and billions of itself. The circle of light that appeared in the starry sky might be a galaxy that could contain billions and billions of such a star. Even the hazy light fog in a certain place might be a galaxy group that could contain billions and billions of galaxies. One could imagine the intensity of this shock. In fact, Luo Fan suspected that even saints could feel their own insignificance from this shock and feel reverence for the entire Earth's universe. This difference in reverence might be the reason why the saints of the primordial world and the saints of the Earth's universe did things differently. In the legends, the saints of the primordial world only treated the primordial world as a chessboard. For their own interests, they could even break the chessboard and split the primordial world into countless parts. As for the saints of the Earth's universe, according to Luo Fan's understanding, they treated the entire Earth's universe as a supreme existence that needed to be resisted by gathering the power of all saints. Even if they wanted to reverse the flow of time, they could only do so when the times changed. It could be seen that the behavior of the two was different. After this inexplicable comparison flashed across his mind, Luo Fan directly threw all these thoughts to the back of his mind. The saint was a realm above the zenith heaven. To Luo Fan, who was still seeking the mysteries of the zenith heaven, it was too far away. It had long exceeded the limits of his understanding. It could be said that no matter how convinced Luo Fan was at this moment, even if he was willing to risk his life for the truth, there might be a huge difference between the truth and reality. Under such circumstances, it was simply asking for trouble for him to guess about the various aspects of the saint realm. Naturally, he would not waste too much energy on it. After arriving at this river system, Luo Fan felt that the place that was faintly connected to him was still so blurry and untraceable. After all, this river system was just too big. Compared to the scale of this river system, there was not much difference between being outside and inside the river system. It could be said that even with Luo Fan's ability, it was like searching for a needle in a haystack if you wanted to find a certain location amidst so many stars in such a huge galaxy. Even if he could vaguely sense it, it would be like searching for a needle in a haystack. After understanding that it was impossible to directly reach that place with this kind of sensing, Luo Fan shook his head and carefully sensed some of the stars nearby. In the end, he chose the most stable star, lifted his foot, and directly crossed a distance of dozens of light years, arriving outside the star system. The central star of this star system was about 10 times larger than the Sun, and there were more than 300 planets in the star system. Chapter 617. Chapter 657. Chapter 657. Deep in the divine soul, with a single thought, Luo Fan completely grasped the differences between the more than 300 planets in this star system. He directly chose the 36th planet, starting from the central star. Green at hashtag Little Yin Talk in net. Mobile novel website, he took a step forward and arrived outside the planet. Compared to the other planets, this planet had a thick atmosphere, and the entire planet was about 10 times the size of Earth. Looking down from outside the planet, one could see that the surface of the planet was crimson red like a desert. However, there was a faint feeling of endless power brewing within it, as if some kind of strange explosion could happen at any moment. causing the entire planet to undergo a shocking change. The reason why Luo Fan chose this planet was because of this brewing power. This power was the manifestation of the changes that were happening in the core of the planet at all times. If it were to explode, it would be enough to open up countless cracks on the planet, spew out endless lava, and directly change the structure of the entire atmosphere. It might even give birth to life on the planet. Luo Fan did not stop. With a press of his body, the void flashed, and he directly appeared on the surface of the planet. The surface temperature of the planet was almost 100 times that of Earth. Any ordinary person who came here would be roasted in an instant, but it was naturally nothing to Luo Fan. He took a deep breath, and the evil fire chi that filled the void frantically surged into his body. It was refined by stainless and leakless, turning into innate yuan chi to replenish his strength. The place where he landed was on the top of a mountain. This mountain was tens of thousands of feet high, and it was the highest mountain on the entire planet. Standing here, Luo Fan could see almost half of the entire planet. Although this planet was like a desert, it was after all a creation of heaven and earth, and it also contained all kinds of innate mysteries. Compared to the countless traces of life on the planet, it was different. After looking at this place for a while, Luo Fan stepped on the mountain with his right foot. In an instant, the tallest mountain on the entire planet split apart. From top to bottom, a 10-meter-wide crack appeared. It went all the way to the bottom of the mountain, and it didn't stop there. Instead, it continued to split apart until it reached the core of the planet. When the crack appeared, it was as if Luo Fan was walking down an invisible staircase. He continued to descend, and in just a few steps, he arrived at the deepest part of the crack, the core of the planet. Wherever he passed, the crack would naturally close up, as if it had never been there in the first place. When he arrived at the center of the planet's core, the crack that led from the highest mountain peak to the deepest core had completely closed, as if it had never appeared before. The core of this planet was an extremely dense solid metal. This solid metal had a radius of several tens of feet, but its mass was extremely shocking. Even the weight of the mountain that Luo Fan had been standing on would not be able to compare to the weight of this solid metal. Such a dense solid naturally had an indescribable gravitational force on everything around it. Around the solid metal, the thick layer of magma that contained boundless evil fire chi flowed at an unimaginable speed under this gravitational force. The power that was brewing on the entire planet and could erupt at any time came from this layer of magma. At this time, Luo Fan was directly standing on the star nucleus with a radius of several dozen feet. With the effect of flawless and leakless, he pushed away the surrounding rapidly flowing magma layer, allowing the magma layer to naturally bypass him, and the flow trajectory had a subtle change. If Luo Fan was just an ordinary powerful cultivator, he would only be able to resist the impact of the magma. The result of his arrival would definitely be that the entire magma's trajectory would be changed, breaking its original balance. The power that was still brewing would explode, breaking through the thick layer of magma and shaking the surface of the planet. This would cause the planet to undergo changes that would only appear after who knew how many years. However, Luo Fan was clearly not an ordinary powerful cultivator. The stainless and leakless nature's effect was very profound. The way it pushed away the various obstructions of the outside world was to merge with the Great Tao. Borrowing the supreme power of the Great Tao, it directly fused with the surrounding magma. The moment it appeared, it naturally formed a new balance in the magma that contained boundless evil fire chi, making it impossible for it to erupt prematurely. Standing on the surface of the planet, Luo Fan instantly felt a gravitational force that was powerful enough to flatten steel tens of thousands of feet into iron pancakes coming from under his feet. Luo Fan did not care about this gravitational force. Such a strong gravitational force was not enough to affect him. In fact, even if this gravitational force was thousands of times stronger, it would not be able to hurt him. Under this gravitational force, he sat down cross-legged and closed his eyes slightly, carefully sensing all the changes in the planet's core. Relying on this feeling, he gradually fused his spirit with the planet's core. After an unknown amount of time, a strange feeling made Luo Fan return to his senses. After an unknown amount of time, the current Luo Fan had a strange feeling that he had completely fused with the entire planet. At this moment, he seemed to be the planet, and the planet seemed to be his body. The endless changes that occurred inside and outside the planet at this moment instantly became the changes inside his body, completely under his control. The vicissitudes formed by the planet's billions of years of existence became his vicissitudes at this moment. This planet was not like Yin Kong, who had already formed a spiritual consciousness and cultivated into a Buddha. It did not have any spirituality, but the endless flow of time still left countless traces on its body. Luo Fan, whose spirit had fused with the planet, felt an indescribable sense of power at this moment. This kind of power was not the strength of power, nor was it the strength of spiritual consciousness, but the strength of the spirit and the will. The entire planet seemed to have become his spiritual support, able to support him to do anything. Carefully sensing this strange feeling, Luo Fan smiled slightly, slowly closed his eyes, and began to explore the various hidden things in the depths of his soul. At this moment, there were as many as 3 existences hidden in the depths of Luo Fan's soul. In addition to the indestructible imprint, there was also the miraculous existence that naturally condensed in the depths of his soul when he first saw the Buddha, as well as the spiritual consciousness that invaded his body and wanted to erase his spiritual consciousness and replace him. The indestructible imprint was something that he had seized from the god of space and time through various means. It was a mark that was naturally condensed because he had seen the saint. He had already studied it for hundreds of millions of years, and it could be considered a fruitful achievement. Naturally, it was not something that he could explore at this time. In addition, the other 2 existences were very unfamiliar to Luo Fan, but they both required Luo Fan to carefully explore in order to understand the mysteries within. Among these 2 existences, the lower-level one was a more direct threat to Luo Fan, and it was the spiritual consciousness that wanted to take over his body. After all, the strange existence that naturally condensed from watching the Buddha was obtained from the Buddha, who was tens of thousands of times higher than the innate zenith heaven cultivation realm. And the spiritual consciousness came from a power that was equivalent to the power of the innate zenith heaven cultivation realm. The difference between the 2 levels could be seen at a glance. Although the strange existence that naturally condensed from watching the Buddha was of a higher level, it was just an inanimate object. It did not directly reveal any malice towards Luo Fan, but the spiritual consciousness directly wanted to take over Luo Fan and erase his spiritual consciousness. Naturally, it did not take much to figure out which of the 2 was a more direct threat to Luo Fan. Luo Fan chose to fuse his spirit with the planet to deal with this spiritual consciousness. After recollecting his thoughts, above the infinite world in the depths of his soul, an indomitable god was suddenly born. This god was solemn, and its power shook the world. It seemed that even the infinite universe and the infinite world could not contain it. And looking at its appearance, it was the appearance of Luo Fan. After this god was born, he casually pointed, and one of the worlds below suddenly shook. A golden figure exuding infinite sharp killing intent was directly spat out by that world. The golden-clad figure was only as tall as a normal person, but his entire body rippled with unparalleled power. Profound divine abilities condensed with every movement he made, destroying all matter, energy, and even space-time in the surroundings at all times. This golden figure was formed by the spiritual consciousness. From the time Luo Fan created the infinite world in the depths of his soul until now, it seemed to Luo Fan that it was not a long period of time, only a few years at most. But because the infinite world was under Luo Fan's absolute control, the space-time laws in it were naturally determined by Luo Fan's will. Therefore, in the infinite world that was created, billions of years had passed. After such a long period of time, Although Gene SE's figure had not broken through the illusory world, and his various changes were gradually being probed by Luo Fan, the situation he was in was getting worse and worse, but it was not as if he had gained nothing. At the very least, by shuttling through one world after another, he had already tempered his own spiritual sense to the point of perfection. Moreover, by continuously battling in one world after another, he had comprehended many of the laws of these worlds that Luo Fan had created, and created many divine abilities and techniques that were suitable for these worlds. Any world, even if it was created by illusions, must contain a complete set of laws that could support the long-term operation of the world. As long as there were laws for existences like spiritual sense, there were countless places that could be used. Creating divine abilities and techniques that were suitable for these worlds was also a very natural thing. It could be said that the current spiritual sense's strength in these worlds was already tens of thousands of times stronger than it was in the past. When the figure was spat out by the world, he quickly reacted. A mysterious light appeared out of nowhere and enveloped his body, firmly protecting him. After doing this, he raised his head and looked at the huge god that was like a torch in the darkness. A faint sneer appeared on his face, and he said, "You finally dare to appear in front of me. Looks like you have absolute confidence in dealing with me." The god that looked exactly like Luo Fan was the manifestation of Luo Fan's will. Although he and the spiritual consciousness were already outside the endless world that had been created, there was still an extremely tough barrier between them and the origin of his spirit. In other words, this place that seemed to be where the origin of his spirit was actually just a larger layer of the illusory world. When Luo Fan heard the words of the spiritual consciousness, he shook his head and said, No matter how much I've prepared, I don't have absolute confidence in dealing with you. After all, my realm is a level lower than yours." Although he said this, there was not a trace of lack of confidence on his face. It was as if what he said had nothing to do with him and could not affect any of his decisions. When the spiritual consciousness heard Luo Fan's words and looked at Luo Fan's expression, it was slightly taken aback. However, it quickly recovered and sneered. "It seems that you have other plans, but I don't care what plans you have. Your body is mine." As the spiritual consciousness spoke, its body trembled and instantly grew thousands of times larger. It directly rose above the countless worlds and only stopped growing when it was the same height as the god form from Luo Fan's will. Then the spiritual consciousness that had grown to such a huge size shook and raised its hand to slap at Luo Fan. Bolts of lightning condensed in the void to form a majestic thunderclap palace that emitted boundless heavenly might. It fell towards Luo Fan like a mountain pressing down on him. During this process, there were also countless bolts of lightning in the shape of various strange beasts that surged out of the thunderclap palace and rushed towards Luo Fan in an overwhelming manner. Luo Fan's eyes flashed. He had already seen through the origin of this ability and could not help but sigh in admiration. The ability to condense the thunderclap palace and summon countless strange beasts that were as large as him was rooted in an extremely basic and simple law of lightning that he had constructed when he had created the endless worlds. That thunder law was so simple that Luo Fan had never thought that it could actually give rise to a divine ability that was powerful to such an extent. And it was precisely because the foundation of the law was so simple that even though Luo Fan had created this law, he couldn't change the law to eliminate this mystic ability. He could only rely on his own mystic ability to resist and fight. After all, it was precisely because the foundation of the law was simple that if he changed the law in order to resist the ability, it would affect the endless worlds he had created and make them unstable. It might even cause many worlds to collapse. If these worlds collapsed, it would be a great opportunity for the spiritual consciousness. It might allow it to directly break through the barriers of the endless worlds and directly come into contact with the origin of Luo Fan's spirit. It might even be able to directly erase Luo Fan's spiritual consciousness and replace Luo Fan. In this 1/100000th of an instant, Luo Fan had already clearly thought of all the possible consequences. With a thought, he casually pointed a finger. The space shook, and an invisible force was formed out of nowhere. It swept across a radius of hundreds of millions of miles, directly wiping out the endless beasts of lightning. After these exotic beast thunderbolts were swept away, the thunderbolts contained within them disappeared into thin air. The Thunder Heavenly Palace above shook again, and an overwhelming amount of exotic beast thunderbolts gushed out from it, pouncing towards Luo Fan. These beasts of lightning were not the same as the previous wave of beasts of lightning. Instead, there were slight changes, as if they had undergone some subtle adjustments. It was the subtle changes that caused the might of these beasts of lightning to increase, and their strength to become even more terrifying. The shock caused by the overwhelming beasts of lightning became even more intense. When Luo Fan noticed the changes of these beasts of lightning, he instantly knew that this was because the spiritual consciousness had comprehended some of the laws in the current environment through Luo Fan's previous actions. Therefore, it used these comprehensions to adjust its divine ability, allowing its divine ability to be more compatible with the current environment, allowing the power it could exert in this environment to become even more terrifying. Innate Zenith Heaven Realm cultivators are really powerful. Even a spiritual consciousness that's born from a strand of power is so shocking. At this moment, Luo Fan could not help but sigh with emotion. It was not difficult for Luo Fan to improve his spirit technique's secret art in the midst of battle and gain the growth of his Tao during battle. However, it was rather difficult for Luo Fan to do it so quickly and face some kind of law that was casually conjured. Even if he was confident that he could do it, it would definitely be quite strenuous. However, the spiritual consciousness in front of him had done it so easily. Moreover, it would take him a long time to understand the principle behind this kind of divine power adjustment and understand which point of the rules it was using. This was enough to show how amazing this spiritual consciousness was. Now that Luo Fan knew that this person could adjust his magical ability through the laws he could casually conjure, Luo Fan knew that if he used those laws to break the attack of the magical ability, it would only increase his spiritual senses' understanding of the laws, making the power of the spiritual senses' magical ability stronger and stronger. Therefore, he raised his hands in the face of the endless exotic beast thunderbolts and pounced forward. In an instant, billions of palms appeared and directly pressed down on the vital points of every single exotic beast thunderbolt, directly turning the overwhelming number of exotic beasts into dust. Following that, the palm did not stop. Instead, it followed the flow and pressed down on the heavenly Thunderbolt Palace before it could even react. There was a crack. The heavenly Thunderbolt Palace crumbled as if it was made of paper. It turned into countless lightning bolts and was devoured by the void, disappearing without a trace. Seeing such a change, the spiritual consciousness's eyes flickered with golden light. Its body shook and it roared. In an instant, its body split into hundreds of millions of copies. Every single copy was the same size and solid. Even their power was equally powerful. They covered the sky and the earth as they pounced towards Luo Fan. Every single copy happened to deal with each of the palms that Luo Fan condensed out of thin air. In an instant, the spiritual consciousness had already comprehended the law that Luo Fan had conjured. In fact, it took a step further and evolved the law into this clone divine ability. Chapter 618. If you don't manifest it, I'm afraid it won't be so easy for me to deal with you. This thought flashed through Luo Fan's mind. Then, the void trembled, and another formless law materialized. This invisible law combined with the law that allowed Luo Fan's palm to split into billions of clones and produced an extremely subtle change. This subtle change caused the countless illusory worlds below Luo Fan to naturally produce a suction force, directly acting on the billions of palms that Luo Fan had split up above and the billions of clones that the spiritual sense had split up. This suction force came directly from the change in the law, and it was impossible to resist. In an instant, It swallowed Luo Fan's palms and the 10,000 clones of the spiritual sense. Luo Fan's palms, who were above the billions of worlds, had turned into nothingness, and the spiritual sense in front of him had completely disappeared. With a slight thought, Luo Fan's palms grew back, and they were no different from before. After all, the Luo Fan here was only the materialization of his thoughts. As long as Luo Fan's thoughts existed, they would naturally exist forever, and it was extremely easy to restore them. After his body recovered, Luo Fan's thoughts moved slightly, and he casually grabbed at the illusory world below him, causing it to collapse with a loud bang. Along with the collapse of this world, all the matter and power that contained the spiritual sense in this world collapsed. These were all created by Luo Fan at will. Although they had various characteristics, as if they were real, they were all illusory. However, not all of these worlds were illusory, and there were real existences among them. That was one of the clones of the spiritual sense. The law that Luo Fan had deliberately created before was a kind of absolute division. After the palms split up, they were directly separated absolutely, and there was no connection between any two separated palms. Because of this, he didn't retract his palms after they were swallowed by the world, and instead urged his thoughts to condense them again. Therefore, the method of division of the spiritual consciousness that had created countless avatars with the help of these laws was naturally absolute division. If the spiritual consciousness could retract the divine ability before the rules changed, it would naturally be able to fuse back into one, and there would be no difference from before. However, this had never happened before. In the process of executing the divine ability, the laws changed. Those clones were separated into countless worlds, and the connection between those clones was severed by those worlds. Moreover, this cutoff was deliberately created by Luo Fan. Naturally, it was not so easy to connect. Of course, even so, after a certain amount of time, the divine ability would still be able to connect and be removed. But now is not the time. Although the rules were created by Luo Fan in order to deceive the spiritual consciousness, it still required a powerful attack power to deceive the spiritual consciousness. Therefore, after splitting his palms into billions of palms, the power of each palm did not weaken at all. They were still as powerful as when they first fused into one. It was the same for the clones of the spiritual consciousness. Although they had already split into billions, the power of each one was the same as when they first fused into one. Their attack power and battle power did not weaken at all. As a result, their battle power had increased by billions of times. Because of this, the spiritual consciousness was able to instantly create such a divine ability to battle after analyzing the laws. However, this was only on the surface. That power could be enhanced by the blessing of the world, but that spiritual sense, and that will could not receive such a blessing, could not be enhanced like this. In order to control the billions of clones, the spiritual consciousness still needed to be divided into billions of parts, and the willpower of the spiritual consciousness also needed to be divided into billions of parts in order to perfectly control the billions of clones. This drawback was that when the divine ability was used, it would naturally be strengthened by the laws and would not affect the display of battle power. However, if it was not a battle, the drawback would become fatal. Just like that. Although the power of the spiritual consciousness after splitting into billions of parts was the same as the original, and there was no difference, it seemed that their battle power was the same as before. However, the power that increased the power of the billions of parts came from the illusion created by Luo Fan. Since the countless worlds were created by Luo Fan, when Luo Fan destroyed the worlds, the power of the parts naturally disappeared. At the moment the world was destroyed, the clone formed by the spiritual sense suddenly collapsed. The spiritual sense, and will contained within it, which was a billionth of the spiritual sense, directly separated from the ruins of the world. It did its best to change before Luo Fan, try to condense into a corporeal body. Luo Fan smiled and waved his hand. His spiritual consciousness and willpower that had become one with the planet suddenly descended and directly covered the spiritual consciousness and willpower. When the spiritual consciousness and willpower shrouded it, the 1 billionth of the spiritual consciousness felt a huge planet suddenly colliding with it. An indescribable pain was felt, and then it was completely shattered by the planet and turned into powder. The endless information contained in it directly dissipated. With a slight thought, Luo Fan directly collected the drifting information and sent it into his sea of consciousness, where it condensed into a spiritual imprint. Seeing that this method was effective, Luo Fan would not hesitate anymore. With a slight thought, the worlds collapsed one after another. The moment the spiritual consciousness emerged, it directly used the spiritual consciousness that had become one with the planet to launch an attack on the spiritual consciousness and directly obliterated it. It directly collected the information and sent it into the sea of consciousness to replenish the spiritual imprint. The spiritual consciousness itself was condensed from a powerful force that was similar to the innate zenith heaven cultivation. Its nature was several times higher than that of Luo Fan. If it was in its complete state, even Luo Fan's spiritual consciousness that had become one with the planet would definitely not be able to completely suppress it. If the spiritual consciousness was in its complete state and Luo Fan acted in this way, the result would at most be that both sides would be injured. Luo Fan's spiritual consciousness would be greatly damaged, and the planet he was on might also suffer from countless hidden injuries due to the impact. The possibility of life being born in the future might even become impossible. But it was naturally different now. The spiritual consciousness was divided into billions of parts. Although the essence of each part was still at the level of the innate zenith heaven cultivation and was still much higher than that of Luo Fan, in terms of absolute power, it was so insignificant. By relying on the spiritual consciousness that had become one with the planet, he easily obliterated the spiritual consciousness and directly extracted the memories within it. Just like that, it only took a few breaths of time. The infinite world that Luo Fan had created had been completely destroyed, and every part of the spiritual consciousness contained within it had been completely destroyed by the destructive force of the world. At this moment, only the last part of the spiritual consciousness was left in front of Luo Fan. The last part of the spiritual consciousness was trying hard to change and condense into a physical body again. This spiritual consciousness was 1 billionth of the complete spiritual consciousness. It was no different from the other spiritual consciousnesses that Luo Fan had destroyed, and it also contained the spiritual consciousness will. Seriously speaking, apart from its strength, it was no different from the spiritual consciousness. It could still communicate with it, and still had a complete consciousness. I didn't expect that I would actually step into such a low-level trap. The spiritual consciousness tried hard to change for a long time, and it finally condensed into a rather illusory figure that appeared in front of Luo Fan. Luo Fan smiled slightly. He turned his body and had already shrunk to the same size as the golden figure. Although this trap was low-level, it would definitely succeed. This is determined by your nature. Even if you return to that time now, you will definitely step into this trap. The figure opened its mouth, wanting to say something, but in the end, it could only turn into a sigh. No, even if I return to the beginning, I will definitely step into this trap. This is because this is my only chance to fuse the spirit with the planet and let the entire planet suffer the backlash of the will. This is really a wonderful idea. Luo Fan had a smile on his face as he calmly looked at the golden figure in front of him. The golden figure sighed and said, "You didn't keep me here just to talk nonsense with me, did you? I need your understanding of power. Although I have obtained countless of your memories, understanding cannot be replaced by memories," said Luo Fan. "Hee. Do you really think that I'll share my understanding of strength with you?" The golden figure laughed. "I'm just asking casually. If I can obtain it, it will be an unexpected gain for a man. If I can't, it doesn't matter." Luo Fan also laughed. The figure looked at Luo Fan quietly. When he saw the incomparably relaxed smile on Luo Fan's face, He finally believed that Luo Fan's words were sincere. In the end, he sighed and said, "If that's the case, since I am about to die, I can't give my understanding to you. However, you have to promise me one thing." Luo Fan seemed to have already expected the figure to say that. Without any hesitation, he said, "Speak. In the future, if you meet any of my previous selves who harm you, if possible, spare them once." The golden figure stared at Luo Fan and said, "As long as I obtain your understanding of power, your previous selves will no longer be of any use to me, nor will they pose any threat to me. If they don't go overboard, it's fine to let them go." Luo Fan smiled. This condition was completely within his expectations. Thus, he said it without any hesitation. At the same time, through the words, he also knew that this spiritual sense should be the spiritual sense that was condensed by that power in the end. It was also the spiritual sense that the power that had destroyed the only planet in the Child Mother Galaxy possessed. As for why he was able to survive Yen Kong's furious attack, it must have involved the extremely high nature of that power. It was not something unimaginable. Clearly, the previous selves that the spiritual sense spoke of were the dozens of spiritual senses that had escaped due to the condensation of the Great Tao. Although Luo Fan's words were filled with uncertainty, the golden figure knew that this was the limit of what Luo Fan could promise. He sighed and said, "I hope you remember what you've said." After saying that, his body shook and changed in the air. He turned into a complicated formation that was formed by countless runes. There were countless strange arcane artifacts in the formation. Among them, the 8 largest arcane artifacts gave off an aura that Luo Fan was very familiar with. It was the aura of the 8 ancestors of cultivation. This formation was none other than the formation that had been created by the 8 ancestors of cultivation, combining the bloodline power of almost all the cultivators in the Mother and Child star system, as well as the various magical treasures refined by the entire cultivation world over the course of hundreds of millions of years. A faint smile appeared on Luo Fan's face when he saw this formation. This formation was the origin of the spiritual sense. The spiritual sense came from that power, and that power came from his complicated and profound formation. Therefore, as long as he controlled this formation, everything about the spiritual sense would be under Luo Fan's control. The spiritual sense's understanding of power, the great Tao, and the laws would be open to Luo Fan for him to choose from. With a thought, Luo Fan's spiritual will enveloped the huge formation and rushed into the 8 most important formation eyes in the middle of the formation. These were the formation eyes formed by the 8 ancestors of cultivation's bloodline power and the arcane artifacts. After entering the formation eyes, his spiritual will directly refine the bloodline power in the formation eyes, allowing the bloodline power and the arcane artifacts to leave their ownerless state. Then, his spiritual will spread out along the 8 formation eyes, refining them one by one and slowly strengthening his control over the formation. And in the process of him continuously refining the formation eye, the spiritual sense that was fused with the entire formation also underwent an inexplicable change. Its independent spirituality was gradually being lost, and the willpower that Luo Fan originally possessed, which he needed to rely on the grand essence of the planet to resist, gradually became obscure. However, the instinctive resistance produced by the spiritual sense and the will seemed to be suppressed by a force, causing the spiritual sense and the will to passively endure the change that was almost a disaster for them. After an unknown amount of time, the formation suddenly shook, and in an instant, endless changes occurred. Starting from the 8 huge spiritual senses in the center, a mysterious and extraordinary vibration was transmitted in all directions. This vibration contained endless mysteries. It seemed to be able to attract the great Tao, allowing some kind of strange power to be added to the formation. In the end, after the vibration reverberated throughout the entire formation for 91 times, a ray of light shot into the sky from the center of the formation. In an instant, a figure condensed in the void above the formation. It was a green figure. The figure's appearance was that of Luo Fan. However, This Luo fan's eyes seemed to be several hundred times deeper than his original bodies. When his eyes shone, he seemed to be able to faintly see through some kind of extremely subtle profundity. Moreover, his every move seemed to be able to draw the support of the unseen Grand Tao and possessed unimaginable might. It's a pity that the bloodline power and the arcane tools aren't real. If they were real, perhaps I would be able to directly comprehend some kind of mysteries similar to the mysteries of Origin Heaven. After a long while, Luo Fan sighed and casually waved his hand. The formation quickly shrank and was absorbed into his chest. At this moment, the formation was equivalent to an existence that he had refined into a clone. Everything about the formation was naturally known to him. As a result, he understood that he could faintly see some kind of mystery that surpassed his current cultivation realm. He seemed to be able to casually step into that realm and possess abilities that were thousands of times greater than his current cultivation realm. But that was only an illusion. Moreover, that realm wasn't the realm of innate golden immortals. It was a realm that was on the same level as innate golden immortals, but it was a completely different realm. This realm wasn't comprehending the mysteries of the Origin Heaven realm, but it was comprehending another profundity that Luo Fan couldn't give a name to. However, it directly started from the essence of energy and went straight to the source of energy. It was a profundity that allowed energy to undergo various inconceivable transformations. Amongst these profundities, bestowing energy with intelligence and allowing energy to naturally give birth to consciousness was only the simplest and most basic form of transformation. The reason why he couldn't comprehend that profundity was naturally because this form of existence that Luo Fan was in right now was merely a transformation of his consciousness. If this formation was real, then the bloodline energy within it and the artifacts within it were real, then they would naturally be able to be combined together and condense an energy that was at the level of an innate golden immortal through an unbelievable method. Then he would be able to derive the profundities related to that energy from the Grand Tao, and he would be able to understand that profundity without having to comprehend it. However, at this moment, the bloodline power and arcane tools within the formation were essentially only consciousness. Since it was consciousness, it was naturally impossible for it to truly receive the blessing of the Grand Tao. So it was naturally impossible for it to condense a strand of energy that was similar to the innate golden immortals, and it was naturally impossible for the Grand Tao to give it that profundity. In fact, the fact that these spiritual senses could condense into his current spiritual sense showed that the formation was extremely profound and had unimaginable mysteries. After the formation was kept back into the heart of the consciousness, the Luo Fan in front of the consciousness trembled and collapsed with a bang. It transformed back into a thought and left the depths of his soul. Subsequently, the consciousness clone of Luo Fan that was condensed from the formation took a step out and directly walked out of his soul, entering the world in his sea of consciousness. As it stepped into the world in the sea of consciousness, the boundless information and memories that Luo Fan had gathered by destroying billions of consciousness clones collapsed with a bang. It transformed back into boundless information and memories, and with a jolt, it was all absorbed by the consciousness and transformed back into the memories of the consciousness. If the information and memories were originally, it would require countless analysis and innumerable deductions for Luo Fan to understand them. However, at this moment, he could completely understand them with just a thought. After all, the information and memories were the consciousness formed from the power condensed from the formation. In essence, it was an existence that was different from Luo Fan, so it would naturally require a lot of work to understand it. At this moment, Luo Fan, who was in front of the information and memories, was also a clone condensed from the formation formed by the spiritual sense. From a certain point of view, the information and memories could also be regarded as his information and memories. Under such circumstances, it was naturally extremely easy for him to understand the information and memories. Chapter 658 Spiritual Sense Doppelganger.